Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to CSIS. My name is Laura Delgado Lopez. I am a visiting fellow here in the Americas Program. Before we formally begin, let's talk logistics. Our event will run until 5 o'clock with a 10-minute break right before the second panel. If you're joining us in person, you can ask questions by scanning the QR code that you now see on either side of the stage. You also see them on the back of the chairs. If you are joining us virtually, please submit questions by clicking the Ask Live questions on the event page or in the YouTube description. Please note that a recording of today's event will be available following the discussion. My research and writing focuses on the international engagement of Latin American space actors, a topic that is not very well studied outside of the region and that deserves more attention, one of the takeaways I hope you leave with after today's event. So allow me to use this opportunity to answer two questions. First, why space? My response to that is something that may not be obvious when you look at depictions of space activities far out in the solar system. Space activities today, and for the foreseeable future, matter only on Earth, and they matter a lot. According to the Space Foundation, the global space sector grew to $546 billion in 2022. Commercial activities make up the biggest chunk of this at $427.6 billion. This includes what you may typically associate with space, satellites, launch vehicles, ground stations, but also the derived products and services. So in concrete terms, we are talking about the telecommunication satellites and infrastructure that connect millions of users to banking, telehealth, and other essential services. It also includes remote sensing systems and the analysis of data about the planet to inform severe weather forecasts, disaster response, air quality, and the health of ecosystems. It includes the navigation, position, and timing services derived from systems like GPS that underpin every financial transaction and are critical to all major modes of transportation. In fact, space may have helped you find your way to the CSIS building today and may have helped you connect with us today from your country. So space is cool, yes, but that is not the reason why we see growing investment in this sector or why global space activity is projected to grow to $800 billion, with some estimates exceeding $1 trillion by 2040. Space is ultimately a tool to meet needs here on Earth. This leads us to our second question: why space in the Americas? When space activities in Latin America make headlines, it is typically limited to concerns over the influence of extra-regional actors like China or Russia. And while this is certainly an important topic, there is a lot more to look at. These are developments that matter for many of the same strategic, political, and economic reasons at the core of the regional conversation. Space nations across the region seek to leverage growing commercial activity and create conditions where domestic technology and research companies can participate in the growing market we just talked about. This interest in economic opportunities can be seen in the national strategies and policies of countries like Chile and Argentina. Brazil, for instance, has sought to raise awareness of its domestic space sector with the third edition of the Brazilian Space Industry Catalog, profiling 55 space companies. At smaller scales, we see business efforts emerging even in countries without national space programs, building on research and technical expertise in adjacent sectors. Organizations like Space LATAM help provide guidance and matchmaking to this new generation of entrepreneurs. A national space cluster in Mexico, CINIEM, helps meet growing demand for national and regional networks across industry, government, and academia, with nearly 70 members across 10 countries. The point is, there is a lot of activity, a lot of energy and appetite for building bridges to leverage talent and resources across the region. But enabling this will require rooting them in broader US-Latin American efforts to deepen coordination and integration. This is a conversation that cannot take place in the space sector alone. The realities of political polarization, institutional instability, corruption, insecurity, they permeate here as well. This is where the regional perspective and expertise matters, and why this conversation, which is happening in some fashion in other regions like Africa or Southeast Asia, must also happen in the Americas. to realize both its economic potential and the contribution that space assets themselves can help in tackling shared priorities will require an integrated approach that recognizes the unique challenges of the region and leverage its assets. With this task in mind, I joined forces with David Loxton of the ITI Space Enterprise Council to put together this event. I want to thank him for this collaboration. We have brought together an incredible lineup of experts, starting with keynote remarks from a former senior government leader in the Department of State's Western Hemisphere Bureau, who will help frame the discussion within the broader context of US-Latin America relations. We will then hear from one of CSIS's top space experts in the Aerospace project before launching onto our deep dives with industry leaders on the good and the uncertain when it comes to actually carrying out these types of partnerships. Finally, I'm thrilled we will hear about the efforts of the Department of Commerce's Office of Space Commerce and any takeaways from this discussion that will impact our work moving forward. We hope today's discussions will deliver both on the energy and the promise of these collaborations, as well as the challenges that require practical solutions to make them possible. Ultimately, I want you to leave thinking, why not space? And why not in the Americas? Thank you for being here, for tuning in. And with that, please join me in welcoming Ryan Berg, Director of the CSIS Americas Program, who will introduce our keynote speaker.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to CSIS. My name is Ryan Berg. I direct the Americas program here. Before I introduce our excellent keynote speaker this afternoon, I just want to send my congratulations to Laura on this excellent event. She's put a lot of effort into this event, and I think it shows in the quality of the speakers, the lineup, and the panels that you're going to hear this afternoon. And I know that I speak for all of us at CSIS Americas when I say that having Laura on our team for about 6 months now, and we are glad to have her around at least for another half a year. We've all learned a lot about the critical issues of space, why it matters, and why Latin Americanists should be paying attention to space issues. So thank you, Laura. Today I have the pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker, Mr. Ricardo Zuniga. Ricardo is a founding partner at Dinámica Americas, an international advisory group. He was a career member of the U.S. Foreign Service, serving for 30 years in multiple roles, including as Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Western Hemisphere Affairs, U.S. Special Envoy for the Northern Triangle, and U.S. Consul General in São Paulo, Brazil. Zuniga was detailed from the State Department to serve as President Obama's principal advisor for the Americas between 2012 and 2015, during which time he worked closely with then Vice President Biden and advised cabinet members and other senior leaders on the Americas. He is a member of the advisory board of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars Latin America Program and the advisory council of the Wilson Center's Brazil Institute. He is fluent in Spanish and Portuguese and served diplomatic tours in Mexico, Portugal, Cuba, Spain, and twice in Brazil. Originally, he was born in Tegucigalpa, Honduras, and he has a bachelor's in international affairs from the University of Virginia. It's a pleasure to have him today. Please help me, or join me rather, in welcoming Ricardo for his opening remarks.
Ryan, thank you so much. As you're reading that bio, it occurs to me that I might be the only person here with only a BA. I'm pretty sure everyone else here is well beyond that, based on the nature of the conversation. First, let me thank you, Ryan, and CSIS. Laura, that's really a fantastic setup. I have to tell you, it's going to flow very clearly from your setup to my conversation. And what I really want to do for this group is offer some context, because as Laura said, it's about real life issues on Earth. And I know that those of you who are in the industry know that very well. I don't think that's entirely perceived as well, certainly in government and in the broader public. And so what I'm going to try to do is offer a framework, maybe a launching point for how the Biden administration looked at economic challenges in the region and how this work fits in. Because frankly, you'll see as I work through, there's a space component to almost everything I'm going to be talking about today. So, I should say that to start, and you'll see this, 4 years ago we were in a very different situation regarding conditions in the Americas, and that really began shaping how the Biden administration looked at economic collaboration in the region. So 4 years ago, or 3 years ago, when they came in to office, the most pressing challenge in the region was clearly the COVID pandemic. And the effect was not just about the human toll. It was very clearly about the economic effect it was having on the region. There was a disproportionate impact in the Americas for a variety of reasons, but the end result was that economies were stuck and moving in reverse in many cases, and some of the largest economies were some of the most affected. That's why the Biden team prioritized Latin America for distribution of COVID vaccines when they became available for export. So COVID was one framing issue. COVID was unfortunately a contributor in the second major issue that concerned the administration, and that was mass migration throughout the Americas. What we saw then was that people who were living on the margins of the economy quickly lost a reason to stay. And there had already been some significant migration, most notably out of Venezuela, as many of you know. That mass migration is touching almost every country in the region in a significant way. There are 20 million people, 20 million migrants in the Americas moving around today. Many of them are mobilized by the results of that pandemic. We see not just Venezuela, which I mentioned, but also Haiti, Cuba, Nicaragua as major sources of mass migration that are touching just about every migration system up and down from Chile, frankly, to the U.S. southwest border. So the Biden administration had to move far beyond its initial focus on dealing with root causes in Central America, which is, in 2021, what I was doing as special envoy was very focused on 3 countries that were the origin of mass migration to the United States for the prior 6 years. Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala. Well, very quickly, we saw very soon, within a year of Biden taking office, you saw movement of not just Venezuelans and Haitians, Cubans, but larger numbers of Colombians that had moved here in the past, huge numbers of Brazilians, Ecuadorians, and again, this is all of that because of that economic displacement. So the second factor here was that economic policy and cooperation with multilateral banks in particular became a real core emphasis in the Biden administration because of the need to look at migration as a regional matter and not just something affecting the U.S. southwest border. A third important factor was U.S. competition with China. You've heard it here. A lot of said absolutely Russia and China are factors, and I'll come back to this during the conversation because I think it's very important. It is one of the few areas of bipartisan consensus in Washington today. The competition with China is seen as a core geopolitical challenge for the United States. And the United States, on a bipartisan basis, is concerned about China's growing role in the Americas as an investor and obviously as a trading partner, but also as a significant investor in sensitive areas, particularly telecommunications and certainly aerospace. And so again, I think that's important to emphasize later in the conversation as well. The fourth and final factor that I'm going to mention today is the consolidation of U.S. industrial policy. That is also an area of bipartisan consensus. Across 2 successive administrations, there's been a hard shift away from the posture of support for free trade agreements as a vehicle for international commercial development and trade development. Industrial policy and domestic investment in the United States enjoy very strong bipartisan support, and there is no room in Washington right now for new free trade agreements. Now, that lack of support for free trade agreements is in tension with something else that emerged from the COVID crisis and with increased tensions with China, which is the need to build resilient supply chains. So that's another important factor that was fed into how the Biden administration thought about how it was going to manage its economic relations in the Americas. That tension actually, I think, opens opportunities that might not otherwise exist for the space industry and related industries, particularly because of that supply chain issue and the need to build resilience into almost every aspect of the U.S. economic relationship with the rest of the world. So these were four of the main themes that the Biden team had in mind when they began laying the groundwork for the Americas Partnership for Economic Prosperity. APEP, our initiative for economic collaboration for deepening ties with the Pacific Islands, served as an initial framework, but very quickly the different circumstances in the region in the Americas began to shift views about how to structure the APEP for the region. So I participated in some of the early debates around the construction of APEP. And as we tried to figure out how you were going to manage a region where we had some of our most important trading partners were free trade agreement partners, and many were not. Like Brazil certainly leaps to mind, but certainly Argentina does as well. And also, at the same time, the Biden administration had to convince its own allies in Congress that APEP was not a backdoor effort to establish a new free trade agreement with other countries in the Americas, particularly ones where we didn't have an FTA. So there were some constraints, some significant ones. One of the most important outcomes from the early discussions that I think is going to be particularly important going forward, including for some of the people in this room, is that there was a decision to maintain an open architecture for APEP. That means that it would not be limited just to free trade partners, nor to the original 12 signatories. It would have, frankly, made very little sense to exclude Brazil and Argentina from a regional agreement meant to promote not just economic integration, but improved economic performance to deal with the challenges I mentioned at the outset. So fortunately, that's where the decisions landed. So when APEP was launched in June 2022 at the Summit of the Americas in Los Angeles, it focused on 5 topics: reinvigorating regional economic institutions and mobilizing investment, multilateral banks primarily. Second, making more resilient supply chains, which I've mentioned. Updating the basic bargain, and let me translate that. What that really means is promoting economic fairness and good governance in management of economic policy. Fourth was creating clean energy jobs and advancing decarbonization and biodiversity. And the fifth was ensuring sustainable and inclusive trade. And the idea there was that it wouldn't be just a growth model, but the idea was to have it be inclusive growth so that you would have communities that previously had not been reached by economic growth. Just to take one country where I've spent a lot of time, in the case of Guatemala, the numbers look great on paper, but when you look at who's actually being reached by that growth, it's not as great, and many of those who are losing out end up in the United States. So that's how the U.S. was looking at a lot of these approaches. So the 12 initial APEP signatories took those positions as starting points. Those were 5 starting points, and began looking for ways to kind of advance the spirit of the initiative in something that was really not as defined as it could have been, which turned out to be an asset. The first APEP leaders meeting took place in November 2023 and included some important updates, including 2 that I think are relevant for the group here today. One was the launching of a new investment platform to channel billions of dollars in financing for sustainable infrastructure. And a second was to set up a new accelerator program to support and steer investment to hundreds of up-and-coming entrepreneurs. I had a chance to speak to one of the people who designed these programs at the White House ahead of the 2023 APEP Leaders Summit to kind of get a back room view at how this came together. And one thing that I took away from that conversation is that APEP is starting to turn into a useful vehicle for resolving challenges that need a political push to get resolved and that don't have a free trade agreement solution or some other mechanism. This is becoming a place where some of those more long-standing challenges can be addressed. That's good. And a good example of that actually is that first one that I mentioned, the Americas Partnership Platform. And this is a collaboration between the U.S. Development Finance Corporation, DFC, and the IDB, the Inter-American Development Bank, the BID, on the private sector arm, the IDB Invest arm. And it's kind of remarkable. Through improved information sharing, which hadn't existed at this scale before, the DFC used information that IDB Invest provided to grow its pipeline in the Americas from $350 million in potential new projects to $3 billion in potential new projects, and that's in 5 months. And again, this is simply by information sharing between two organizations that are well established in Washington. This DFC support, when combined with IDB's investments in the region, represent real tangible work in support of infrastructure investments that are going to advance regional competitiveness, which is a long-standing U.S. objective. Regional competitiveness in comparison to other regions of the world is something that definitely gets attention, again, on a bipartisan basis. The second new initiative that I mentioned, the Accelerator Program, has two components that work in parallel. One is a USAID-funded program that puts together cohorts of entrepreneurs from Latin America and the Caribbean to build business development skills, grow their networks, and otherwise become available to the market, really. Now, what's important about this is it was not a reinvention. It was not something that was created out of whole cloth, but rather brought together incubators, the existing incubators that were national or sub-regional but didn't have reach across the entire Americas. And so it really kind of elevated multiple incubators that were already in operation. And the first cohort of entrepreneurs is going to graduate from this program in June. And at the same time, the second part, this piece that worked in parallel, the government of Uruguay took the lead in organizing an angel investor network to help these cohorts of entrepreneurs actually reach the market successfully. And this is a collection of regional unicorns and venture capital leaders participating in the selection of participants in this USAID-funded cohort process. They listen to the participants in this program. They help them develop their pitches. They help them reach investors. And members of this angel network get early access to some of the best new ideas in the market. So it's a useful tool. So this is a small program now, but it can certainly grow significantly. And it is a positive sign that APEP is moving in the right direction. It's just the start. Much more needs to be done to make the countries of the Americas leaders in innovation and economic development and keep pace with other competitive regions. So let me just close by saying that, again, bringing this back to some realities that might be helpful as you think about how to pitch ideas here in Washington, and as you think about how to kind of highlight your skill sets as companies. First, just again, a framing point, anti-trade sentiment in the United States is a real impediment to economic development. We should not, it just needs to be said flatly, industrial policy is here to stay in the United States. That's definitely the case. APEP is one vehicle for facilitating commerce and overcoming some of these impediments to trade, but it's just one. And so I would say that it's more a mindset of deciding that FTAs are not going to be the vehicle for doing what we need to do anyway. There's an enormous amount of integration that needs to happen, not just within FTAs, but between countries with which there are no free trade agreements. And space and emerging technologies, or technologies that are well established, are going to be a key part of that. So, second, APEP is a sufficiently flexible platform that it can be used well beyond its original mandate. For example, to promote regional regulatory convergence and greater collaboration on setting industrial standards at the international level. This issue of standard setting is sometimes lost as well to policymakers, but in the space industry, particularly in the delivery of these services, whoever sets the standards is basically opening the pathway to benefiting from how that structure is organized at the outset. Third, the private sector has enormous power and influence and can help governments better understand emerging opportunities. In your meetings with governments, do not hold back in proposing solutions to existing challenges, including some of the ones I just described today, but others that might arise as well. Fourth, do not underestimate the importance of U.S. competition with China to decisions coming out of Washington regarding the Americas. It is really a core and fundamental issue that you will hear time and time again. Companies are very well placed to propose ideas about how the United States could make better use of its substantial assets to compete more effectively with China's state-led enterprises. That, I would say, is one of the major factors and weaknesses right now in terms of the U.S. approach to China is alternatives are few at this point. Technology is key to that. But I would say that a lot of this, the real creativity is going to be coming from industry. But explaining that back to policymakers, I think, is a useful use of time. And then finally, the truth is few sectors are better positioned than the space industry to make progress on the complex challenges facing the region. From climate change to education to sustainable agriculture and economic competitiveness, you are vital to realizing our goals as citizens of this region. And that, I think, is one of the strongest assets that you bring as businesses talking to each other and talking to governments across the region. Thank you very much for the invitation to speak here today. It was really an honor to be with you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Ricardo. Those were great opening remarks. We've got about 15 minutes for a short fireside chat here before we turn it over to the first panel of today's excellent conference. And the first question I want to ask you is just a general one, because we've seen over a number of years now Latin American countries with a strong desire to break into some of these cutting-edge industries that involve more advanced technology and manufacturing, more sophisticated manufacturing. So I want to ask you a very general question from that standpoint, which is, what do countries in the region need to unlock their potential in some of these industries? How can the United States partner with some of these countries to grow particular sectors, semiconductors, other advanced technology, areas where we've seen countries in the region express a lot of desire to move into?
So I'd say there's a couple of things that I think are really important. One is, in Washington, you hear a lot of discussion about nearshoring, friendshoring, and other terms but there's almost no activity to actually create the incentives to make nearshoring a tangible reality. And ideas for what can be done to kind of smooth the way for that kind of, and again, I think the most important thing is from the U.S. perspective, it's about supply chains and resilience. So the job, I think, of the private sector in the United States, but certainly in the region, is to explain how they contribute to that resilience and to be very concrete about what can be done to incentivize that kind of participation and that kind of work. Do not forget the role of the multilateral development banks as a platform for getting that done. The IDB in this case is really crucial and does have the ear of the U.S. Treasury Department, does have the ear of the White House, and has enormous expertise kind of built in to help provide frameworks that take into account political realities, regulatory realities, but that can add an extra level of ambition. So working jointly, working together to kind of present those ideas, I think is going to be really crucial. The second piece of that, and I'll just say very briefly, is understand the context. There is just in chip manufacture, for instance, there is a lot of, by those who I think don't understand the industry and governments across the region, there's a sense where they're going to all have sort of domestic chip manufacturing, and that's just not the way this is going to work. But there are resilience means that you're going to make non-economic decisions for promoting production outside of traditional areas, meaning China or Asia, for reasons of strategic access. And so I think understanding what those flows might look like and then making a case, I think, is going to be very important here. In the case of this group as well, I would also say that the markets for use of this technology is vast and really underappreciated. So I think that's helping make those cases directly with not just U.S. policymakers, but U.S. industry groups, I think, is going to be important. It's really about alliances so that you can present ambitious visions for the future that you can plug policy and law into in really every country.
We've done some work here on semiconductors in particular, and I can confirm,
Yes.
in some senses, the sense of unrealistic expectation about what that might mean. I want to move to a question about APEP. You did a really good job of explaining APEP in your opening remarks, what it is, what it isn't. You talked very persuasively about the standard-setting role that APEP can play, which I think is crucial. I wanted to ask you about the topic of today's conference, which is the B2B, the business-to-business collaboration element. How do you see APEP's role in promoting closer B2B collaboration between the US and Latin American countries, both in the space sector, if you want to comment on that, but also beyond the space sector?
I mean, I really think it's underdeveloped in APEP right now, but there's nothing that impedes it. I mean, because I mentioned what as I described what the priorities are, they're really all about social and economic development. They're really about bringing, formalizing the economy, bringing people into the formal economy, improving conditions for the people at the margins. I didn't talk about this, but on the migration front, there is a lot of emphasis within APEP for helping communities that are affected by migration, not necessarily migrants themselves, but communities, and that's almost every major municipality between here and Santiago. So the market is massive. This industry in particular is very, very well placed to go where I think a lot of policy is headed, which is focusing on municipalities, on cities, as opposed to nation states. Subnational work by banks is going to be, and a lot of the best ideas for dealing with these challenges are really coming from cities that have gone through this, right? And so this is ideal. Like, this is a business that can provide information, guidance. As Laura said, everyone uses space, they may not know it. Well, helping them know it and understand that, I think, is going to bring them into it.
From the U.S. perspective, what kind of challenges do we face when we seek to be a better partner in the region from the business-to-business collaboration perspective? I think a lot of us here at CSIS, especially, you mentioned China in your opening remarks, we look at China, we want to be competitive with China, we're just sitting here kind of wringing our hands. What can we do here to be more competitive? What are some of those barriers in your experience to us becoming a better partner in terms of business-to-business collaboration in the region?
Well, I mean, I think the biggest barrier is one of imagination and culture on our side. I mean, coming from somebody who spent a lot of time in U.S. government and had some chances to see it from the outside, but I'm really seeing it from the outside now, very often we will show up and we won't really listen to the other side and the needs that they are trying to resolve. There is really no country in the region that looks at the China competition the same way that we do.
Right.
And so we need to adjust to that reality by offering a better alternative, but we have not found a way to do that. And I think a lot of that comes from, number one, listening to the needs that need to be resolved, which we tend to try to arrive with solutions as opposed to listening to what people really are asking for. And then the other is making clear that, and this is actually, again, let me go back to something I said in my remarks, getting clear and honest feedback from those partners is something that I think people have been too polite. Honestly, I really do. People have been too polite. They need to tell us. What you're telling us does not sell. We want access to your market. We want access to your technology. This is how we can, and space technology in particular has this other added bonus, which is that when you collaborate on space issues, those are by nature sensitive, and it really builds confidence in both directions. We saw this in Brazil over the launch site collaboration, which was really crucial. After years and years, decades of misunderstanding over that, we've actually made progress in the relationship just by talking about these sensitive issues, and that's opened the door to other kinds of sensitive collaboration that wouldn't have been possible without that kind of agreement. So, speak honestly when we aren't listening from the U.S. government side, and also when there are solutions that you might want to offer.
So if you're from the region in the audience today, take note. If you're online watching, take note. Ricardo Zuniga says that you can be less polite in meetings with
my colleagues.
With
my
US.
Former colleagues will love me. Yeah, that's right.
You can drop the formalities and you can tell folks in the private sector what you really think. Our audience today is experts on space, but also folks who come from our Latin America community. And the two, as Laura said in her opening remarks, don't often overlap. And part of today's conference objectives is to get these two communities to realize how much they have in common and why they should be speaking. So as someone who has spent decades working in and with the region, share with us a little bit what your view is as to the relevance of the space sector within the broader context of U.S. Latin American economic cooperation.
Right. So first, there's the obvious one, it's geography. right? There is the, particularly for some kinds of satellite usage, geography matters a lot. As I don't have to tell anyone that's about as much as I know about space. So I'll be very honest, there's much more expertise, but I do know that part. And I do know that geography matters, and making use of that in conversations between governments is really crucial. I would say that these development goals match very clearly with goods that are provided by, and services that are provided by the space sector. And so I think becoming, like, integrating that into these broader development goals is, and actually using that as leverage to open up other, like, more commercially related areas of integration that we really need to see updated. I think this is part of it. These are services, for the most part, that are not most effective when they're bound by the current constraints of our trade agreements. And so a regional effort on this makes a lot of sense.
I want to ask you one final question, which is very general, and it's about your sentiment on the private sector in the region. We've got a lot of colleagues in our Latin America space who, for a long time, have been kind of on our side, which is it's all doom and gloom. And now I think the narrative is starting to change over the last couple of years, and you're starting to see more and more articles coming out about how this is the region's moment, how we should be bullish on the region and not bearish on the region. Do you share this sentiment?
I 100% share it. Look, if you have, I've worked for 30 years at the Department of State. I'm from Tegucigalpa. I've seen the changes that have happened over that period of time. And the truth is, it is a much wealthier, much more successful, much more mobile, socially mobile region than it was 30 or 40 years ago. And the problem is, and that it's not reaching its level of ambition for a whole host of reasons that were, when I was in government, what I dealt with every day. Weak governance, enormous citizen skepticism about the capability of governments to provide solutions. That's general, right, in the West. And Latin America is very much part of the West in that sense. And so I'm extremely optimistic. Why? Because frankly, the human capital has improved dramatically. And I spent a lot of time in Brazil. Brazil is a country that, yes, it's a member of the BRICS. It could easily be a member of the OECD. And you have other countries that are in that same sort of space. And so that's, it's human capital has improved. It is the age, geopolitically, of the rise of the middle is a real thing. Countries have many more options in terms of financing. They have many more options in terms of what the partnerships might look like. And they're not trapped in one side or another by any stretch. And that is to the good. It requires flexibility on the part of the United States and ability to adapt. But these are good things for the region. And the one challenge, and it's where this business in particular comes to bear, is that the easy bet is on commodities still. The easy bet is on feeding the world, yes, ensuring that having these massive water resources still compared to the rest of the world, being leaders on climate. All of these are important, but they're not about moving up the value chain. This is about moving up the value chain. And so that's an area where the U.S. is a fantastic market, a fantastic partner, but there are doors that still need to be open to make that really possible.
I want to have us give one more round of applause to Ricardo Zuniga, our keynote speaker. Thank you for this fireside chat as well. Founding partner at Dinamica Americas, 30 years, member of the Senior Foreign Service and former Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Western Hemisphere Affairs. Thanks very much. And before we leave the stage, I'm going to introduce Clayton Swope, who's the Deputy Director of the Aerospace Security Project here at CSIS and Senior Fellow in the International Security Program. Before joining CSIS, Swope led national security and cybersecurity policy for Amazon's Project Kuiper, an initiative to increase global broadband access through a constellation of satellites in low Earth orbit. I wish I knew exactly what that meant, but it's very impressive. Prior to his time at Amazon, Swope served as a senior advisor on national security, space, foreign affairs, and technology policy issues for a member of the U.S. House of Representatives. He's also worked for more than 14 years at the Central Intelligence Agency, serving largely in the Directorate of Science and Technology, and he's going to introduce the next panel for this conference. So thank you very much.
Thanks for giving me the chance to offer remarks today. I'm Clayton Swope, again, Deputy Director of the Aerospace Security Project here at CSIS. We think a lot about space at the Aerospace Security Project pretty much every day. One thing to think about when we look at encouraging collaboration is just kind of where is the business case and follow the money. So to see who is spending money on space and how are they spending that. Firstly, one thing just real quick is just to note government funding is still a pretty big driver for space activities, but hopefully we're seeing a change on how that money is spent. So historically, governments have wanted to build and operate their own space systems, but globally there is a shift to offer space as a service, so to offer a commercial service from space. And if government buys space as a service, for example, like NASA's doing with its CLPS moon missions, that's a chance for that government investment to pay for space infrastructure that could really kind of accelerate that flywheel for growth in the space economy. Second real quick point, kind of on this follow the money question, is that companies that offer space services, they really can serve a lot of different customers and partner with a lot of different partners across different sectors. We've said a lot today that everyone uses space, but not everyone wants to buy a satellite or a component on a satellite. So it's that service piece that really unlocks that potential and really widens the aperture to look beyond just collaborating in space and on space to really just beyond space. So for companies in Latin America and in the United States that work on space, find other companies that don't care at all about space and teach them why space can help do what they do better. So space is really just one ingredient here. It's just one instrument in the orchestra. And with that, I'm ready to turn it over to David Logsdon from ITI, who leads the Space Enterprise Council with 25 years of experience on these issues in space for the next panel.
Let me speak up here and invite the panel up. Good afternoon, everyone, and good afternoon, people that are tuning in online. My name is David Logsdon. I run the ITI Space Enterprise Council. So I want to talk about a few things today. Space Enterprise Council has been focused on the region for now 7 years, starting with having then Minister of Defense Raul Jungmann from Brazil come to the United States and speak to our members. Right then and there, I understood that there was an opportunity for collaboration and partnership. Shortly thereafter, we took a trade mission to Brazil and Chile. One of my colleagues in the room was on the trade mission with me, and she will remember two specific things. One of the companies that we had with us was SpaceX. The young engineers and technologists and data scientists that went to a conference that we were at in Brazil surrounded her like she was a rock star. There's an opportunity in Latin America to have Latin American young rock stars that are in the space industry. There's certainly that opportunity. So that was Brazil. And then we went over to Santiago. We were speaking to a large group of private sector and students. I noticed a student in the back of the room wearing a NASA shirt. And I said, sir, can you stand up? And I said, wouldn't you love to have a Chilean Space Association shirt? Wouldn't you love to be wearing that? Or one of the leading R&D universities in Chile? I think there's a unique branding opportunity throughout Latin America, whether it's Brazil, Chile, Argentina. That opportunity is there because there are young people that are hungry. They want that opportunity. I was at, Laura and I were at the Colombian Embassy last week. We met with the minister counselor there. He said, we want to drive initiatives in technology and space. We don't have the workforce. I would argue the countries such as Colombia do have the workforce. They just need to understand what the demand signal is, and that is my next point. So, whether you're a striker from the best strikers from Boca Juniors, River fans, or flamenco, or Ecuador, I don't know your best player, and Marta from Brazil, because this is an important point. The people that are listening in are increasingly female. So there are male and female entrepreneurs, innovators, that are your next workforce. So understanding the demand signal supply chain. And that goes two ways. It's Latin American companies that want to do business here in the United States, putting all the pieces together. Creating partnerships with US companies, with European companies, all to do business here in the United States. Also partnering, and I'll mention Chile again, we have an MOU with an organization called ACHIDI. ACHIDI has an MOU with the largest mining trade association in Chile. So it's the ability to cross-pollinate with other business sectors throughout Latin America, because a lot of these business sectors, I'm thinking about the mining industry in Chile, are on the leading edge of incorporating emerging technology into their business life cycles. And that's where the space industry is going. There are hundreds of space companies in Latin America. There are thousands of technology companies. We see the cross-pollination between space companies, technology companies, and of course, cybersecurity companies. That's where a grand opportunity is. So let me go ahead, one more point before I forget. So the US Department of Commerce last week released a space economy study. We did an event at the Argentine embassy this morning. I said to the Department of Commerce, why don't you translate that into Spanish? Why don't you translate that into Portuguese and get that out to our partners? Also, I think there's an opportunity, government by government, to create your own space economy studies, because that's when you're going to get real buy-in from the end user community, whether it's mining, maritime, agribusiness. Get those partners locked in. So I will stop there, and I'm going to go ahead and introduce and bring up our first panel. First panel, if you could come on up. Amber, why don't you sit here? And we'll sit there. Boy, girl, boy, girl. Well, we have a very distinguished panel today. Argentines, Brazilians, U.S. private sector, former National Security Council. So feel free and often to send in your questions. I will vet them. I won't ask any zingers, as long as these guys are nice to me. But please ask questions as we go along, either from what I ask or the responses you get from the speakers. Speakers, also feel free to ask each other questions. We want to have a nice, robust dialogue. So let me go ahead and introduce to my far left, Luis Giovese, the Vice President of Space Division at APEP. Next to me, I have Luciana Longo, industry consultant and former diplomat. Also next to me, I have Amber Charlesworth, Senior Manager, Public Policy, Project Kuiper at Amazon. Next to Amber, I have Andrew Saunders, consultant at Coty Consulting. I'm sure I said that wrong. Coati, okay. And then finally, I have Mike Lubin, Vice President of Corporate Development at Viasat. So, Andrew, let's go ahead and start with you, kind of table setting. What are some of the major trends in business investment activity in the region for both space and technology? Because I had mentioned they're increasingly intertwined. How's this shifted in the last few years?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question, David. First, I want to thank CSIS and you for inviting me to speak on the panel. And so at a very high level, I see three significant trends in the region in space and technology. First is obviously growing public sector interest. And second, increased international cooperation, both multilaterally within the region and bilaterally with the United States and other major players in the space industry. And finally, significant development in the commercial space and private sector, especially in new space. So I'll provide some details on these broad trends. On increased public sector interest, we see across the region a desire to enter this space, and for the ones that have already been there, improve their market position as the commercial sector continues to take off. So although the region has a long history of operating in space, dating all the way back to the 1950s, some countries, such as Argentina and Brazil, have had more sustained activities than others. So governments in the region do not want to fall behind their neighbors, or more importantly, behind the broader global trends as the commercial space industry continues to make headlines. This is especially true with recent developments with inexpensive communications and Earth observation satellites that have the opportunity to solve some of the region's most pressing problems, including infrastructure development, crossing the digital divide, and dealing with and mitigating natural disasters. So Argentina, Brazil, and Mexico have long-standing and relatively robust programs. But in the past decade, we've seen countries as far afield as Paraguay and Bolivia entering into the space. And right now, there are more than 10 nations in the region that have space operations at some level of sophistication or another. We expect this trend to continue as citizens become aware of the opportunities and the technology that is available to them and the services that are being provided by new players in the industry. And this is evidenced by governments trying to get together to cooperate to lower costs, gain or share technology, and to increase their potential bargaining position in the global markets, which really leads us into that second trend of increased international cooperation. And we really see this, again, on both multilateral and bilateral forums. So the first, we saw a big move in 2021 with the creation of ALCE, the Latin American and Caribbean Space Agency, obviously led by Argentina and Mexico, but with over 22 countries now involved in the program, with the objective of coordinating space cooperation activities across the region, but with the secondary activity of objective of fomenting activity in the space sector as they support the activities of the ALCE agency. And so we expect their expectation is that it will play a role similar to the European Space Agency, and we hope to see some concrete results here in the near future. Another important tool for multilateral cooperation is, of course, the Artemis Accords. Right now, we have 6 countries from the region who have entered into the accords. And so this better positions their space agencies and by extension, their space industries for increased cooperation with international partners by agreeing to adhere to a common set of standards in the use of space. And then being party to the agreement gives them the opportunity to participate in the Artemis missions, which will be huge for any company that is able to get involved. And then with regards to bilateral cooperation, we've seen long-standing cooperation between NASA and individual countries in the region, ESA and individual countries in the region, and then also cooperation in between individual countries within the region. But some of the biggest moves that we've seen over the past 5 years were between the United States and Brazil. The 2019 Technology Safeguards Agreement was a sea change in the Brazilian commercial space sector, which allows rockets with U.S. technology to be launched from the Alcântara Launch Center there. And in addition to that, we had a space situational awareness agreement and research, development, testing, and evaluation agreement which allows for joint projects both in the space and defense sectors. So these are really, really important opportunities to move ahead and cooperate not only between governments, but also between businesses in the sector. And so international cooperation and agreements really are what set the favorable conditions for bilateral trade and investment, and by extension, business-to-business cooperation and engagement in the space sector. And then so over the past few years, we've seen clear advances in the private sector and commercial space, the new space, but not only new space and startup actors, but also within the existing actors in the region. MVAP is clearly one of the players that have been benefiting from this increases in commercial space. So obviously we're seeing public-private partnerships, and we're seeing contract of private companies to support and supply components and satellites for government programs. And this follows global trends, including the United States, EU. Latin America's space industry has clearly benefited from these public-private partnerships and government contracts. And then over the past decade, we've seen successes by established players, again, Salcom and ARSAT in Argentina, but also we've been seeing successes by new space players, such as Satellogic, which set up the constellation of Earth observation satellites, the NewSats. So, and then in addition to some homegrown players, we're also seeing the global companies, obviously SpaceX and Amazon Kuiper, looking to enter the region to fill those gaps in connectivity in a region that really needs access to the internet. And it has lacked that infrastructure development over the past years. So again, what we're seeing is increased private sector interest and engagement. We're seeing increased international cooperation, and then we're seeing the growth of commercial and private sector space operations. So those are some of the major trends.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you.
Just like, you made some fantastic points. Like we had identified the TSA enabled the recent launch from South Korea, Ionospace, from Alcantara. And this was in 2023. They signed a contract for 5 years with the possibility of different launches. They have been doing research in oil, in fuel. And so you see that the development of the opening created by the TSA enabled a whole new sector to flourish. And when we talked about that, we were saying, oh, it's still space, yeah. But then you signed the Artemis project. The Artemis project, there is a recent signature of an agreement with Embrapa, which is like, Embrapa is an agriculture government enterprise. We do research. And what are they developing now? The project entails exploring how to produce food in an environment with little water, right? How can you do, they say, space farming? That is extraordinary. So now you're bringing new elements of the economy into contributing to space, and at the same time, contributing to the future of the population. Why is that? Because you said South America has a lot of water, but that's not the reality for the rest of the world. So developing a real research that enables the production of food with environments with a restricted access to water is extraordinary, is our future, is how our kids are gonna be fed. So we're saying that cross-pollination that you meant, right? So I just could not jump in and offer my, like you mentioned Artemis and you mentioned TSA, but there are very concrete aspects of that, that new construct for space that goes beyond connectivity. Connectivity is essential. Nothing's gonna happen in the region without connectivity, but it goes so much farther, right? And this is the kind of thing that we have to start to think about when we think about Latin America. What can we bring that is not just what we're used to, missiles, satellites? How can we step beyond that, right? I'm sorry, I could not keep short.
Oh, there's a lot there. I'll comment on it later, but I'm going to get to all these guys. Just very quickly on Artemis and on the RDT&E and the SSA. Latin American countries need to have a clear, articulate demand signal from the U.S. government, because you need to have the opportunity to grow your private sectors. And without that clear demand signal, it's a little bit difficult at times. So I can tell you, and I'm very happy to report, that there's now a very clear, as of today, could change tomorrow, a demand signal from NASA on Artemis. We've been told that NASA is looking to Latin American nations for ground capabilities on the moon in terms of Artemis. That's what they're looking for. So bring that message back to your countries, folks online. That's what I've been told. So, and just very quickly before I hand it over to Amber, Andrew, you had mentioned the Latin American and Caribbean Space Agency. So, Luis, I know you're private sector, but government-owned. What are your thoughts to date on the space agency? What has it done? What can it do?
Yeah. First of all, thank you, David. Thank you, CSIS. So, well, we are jumping into a related topic here. Yes, we are running as a private company. We are state-owned. So for almost 47 years, we have been doing G2G business, mainly selling domestically or abroad, very high-tech products, and space is one of the business areas, but nuclear and defense and medical centers as well. So what we can see here, you mentioned Artemis. Yes, we see the same thing. We see U.S. government moving or shifting from G2G to B2B, and we are a little bit back on that side, but that is the opportunity. We see that we can try through Artemis to see how we can partner in a B2B framework rather than G2G. So this is one of the lines that we are thinking about. This morning we had a very interesting panel to unlock this potential, meaning that lowering barriers and let us understand better how regulations can contribute or not, and how we should or what we could do to be able to unlock that potential. In Argentina and in our region, we have developed capabilities for more than 30 years. So we believe we have now a well-matured community and ecosystem of private and public companies, institutions, universities, national labs that participated along all these years in the space program. As you understand, or you may know, the domestic market in Argentina is very low. So our strategy is to grow. And to grow, we need to open new markets. And if not, we are not sustainable. So all this ecosystem will be lost somehow in the near future. So this is why we are here. We want to explore more this B2B. In fact, we are here with other 6 companies in the Argentine pavilion. I kindly invite you to show up at the Argentine pavilion. Most of these companies are present here, and we believe we have a voice and something to tell. And in this geopolitical context, I believe you mentioned geographical for geopolitical contribution. So we are in one continent. So why don't we exploit that a little bit more? So I believe what you said, David, is quite important. We need a more clear demand signal from US to see how we can sit together really and figure out what to do in B2B. Thanks.
Thanks, Luis. Amber.
Hi.
Hi. Where are you seeing the most opportunity for growth in telecom in Latin America in the last 5 years?
Yeah, so I think I've probably got the easiest job on the panel. I think it's a great time to be an operator that's providing low Earth orbit broadband service around the globe, and to do that at a fast and affordable pace, I think is just a really great opportunity to be part of this great company. Prior to joining Amazon, I was part of the State Department for over 10 years and spent a couple of years at the National Space Council at the White House. And so certainly was very honored to be part of this panel, really promoting this important conversation. And thank you, Laura, and CSIS, as well as you, David, ITI. You certainly brought just a unique skill set and a set of relationships to an important conversation. So thank you both very much. Happy to be on the panel. And I've been listening carefully to all the remarks. There's been a lot of discussions on consumer demand and where the need is. And there's still over 70 million people in rural communities in the Latin American countries that are unconnected. And so there's certainly a need there. And we look at, well, is the need resulting in demand? What does that look like? And I think it was last December, research came out of Brazil that indicated that there was a 30% uptick in the market for satellite broadband applications. And I think we can put a lot of that back to LEO satellite operators and kind of being able to provide more of a flexible approach to what the consumer demand is. And so at Amazon, that is our goal. We are very customer oriented. What does the consumer need? Every region is going to need a slightly different business model, and so we need to work together to make the business-to-business partnerships work to better understand what our consumers need. And so sometimes we will provide direct service to consumers in the Latin American region, and that's fantastic, but there's other times where we need to be more flexible, and we need to use mobile network operators and be more of a backhaul service and work and partner with the companies directly in the region. And so the great, fantastic thing about being part of the Amazon service here is that we're able to be flexible and adapt to what the consumer needs are. And I just can't underscore this enough. We've had some great discussions in the Latin American region. We want to deepen those ties. We want to be part of the partnership. We want to build the partnership together, really understand what the region needs. And so I'm happy to talk more about that moving forward, but thought I'd keep the opening remarks kind of brief. I think we have a lot to dive into here, but thanks, David.
Thank you, Amber. Mike, Viasat's been operating in the region for quite some time.
Yes.
What country or region-specific policies help drive demand for Viasat services?
Yeah, let me begin by saying that a number of us have wanted to have connectivity declared as a human right, just to bring attention that connectivity is really essential. And satellites in the space industry are going to play a major role in connecting the 2.6 billion unconnected, or the 70+ million rural people in Latin America who are not connected. As a representative of the geriatric arm of the space industry, someone asked me recently why I haven't retired, and I said, I'm not going to retire until I put 150 million people online for the first time. I'm very proud to announce that in Latin America, we've put over 5.5 million, we Viasat have put over 5.5 million school children online for the first time, and over 10 million residents in rural communities. And much of that has happened because of a very successful set of, I would call them quasi-public-private partnerships. We're very proud that in Brazil, for example, we partnered with Telebras, which is effectively a government organization, in actually connecting schools and rural communities throughout Brazil. In Mexico, we've been working with now what's become an arm of the government, LTAN, which has access to national 700 megahertz, and we're providing satellite backhaul to 700 megahertz local distribution, which is putting for the first time millions of people online in rural Mexico. And we're extending this out into Central America and the Caribbean countries and other Latin American countries. But Ricardo said something that was very profound. He mentioned the SDGs. And there's no doubt that the foreign policies are being driven by the demands to satisfy the top 4 SDGs. If you think about no poverty, the World Bank likes to opine that for every 10% increase in internet connectivity, the GDP of a country will go up 1.38%. I don't know why it's not 1.39%, but it's 1.38%. And if you take a $5 trillion Latin American economy and you just increased internet penetration by 10%, that's $70 billion that adds to the GDP of Latin America. That helps the no poverty SDG. You know, the next SDG basically is no hunger. We know that precision agriculture can really change countries from being net importers of food to net exporters of food. And precision agriculture relies heavily on Earth observation satellites, hyperspectral cameras on satellites and UAVs, and the communications so people can take action with respect to precision agriculture. That can absolutely address SDG number 2. And then what about good health? A very proud moment was when one of the governors of a Mexican state said, "Can you help us reduce infant mortality?" I don't know if you realize that infant mortality, even a country as advanced as Mexico, is 2 times that in the United States. And in some countries in Latin America, it's 3 times. And in some states in Latin America, it's 6 times the infant mortality rate of the United States. So with a company called 19 Labs, we implemented e-clinics with ultrasounds in remote communities in this state in Mexico, and we're having very positive outcomes with respect to reducing infant mortality and other diseases in those communities. And now with respect to quality education, which is the 4th SDG, we all know that COVID proved that tele-education was essential. I think the World Bank recently did a study that said that COVID is going to create a $17 trillion deficit in the earnings of kids going forward from the COVID generation. Now we know if we had had more connectivity into those remote communities, I think tele-education would have been extremely important in bridging that gap that has occurred. So satellites are going to play a major future. And I'll just, one more point. LEOs have a tremendous role to play. And one of the major things that LEOs has is something called a lack of latency. And lack of latency is very important for certain applications. But I think we're going to find in many of the unconnected communities throughout the world, affordability is going to be the single most important topic. And so what we have to ask ourselves is, which technologies will address the affordability problem so that we get mass adoption? And I submit that some of the new GEOs that are being launched may actually have better economics than the large mega constellations. So it's not an either or. It's is affordability important, is latency important, is some combination important. But independent of that, we all have a role to play in connecting these 2.6 billion and the 70 million rural people in Latin America.
Thank you. Luciana.
Hi.
Hey.
Well, I forgot my duties of being
I'll ask the question.
Thank you so much for the invitation. David, thank you so much for having me here.
You're welcome.
Thank you for your patience accepting my late recognition of my impoliteness. And I can jump in what he said, if you don't mind, just a sec, about connectivity. And I would add 2 things. I think connectivity in South America, we don't follow the money, we follow the government, which in other words also mean following the money. Governments, they have policies, and those policies are gearing where connectivity is going, right? We've seen all throughout Latin America in general, there have been a push for connectivity in rural and remote areas. I agree with you. There isn't a single technology that is going to suffice and address the problem. It will play a role for Latin America in general, the cost of connectivity. But also, governments are playing an important role in offering connectivity, right? So there is a balance there to be stricken on how we're going to address all those challenges that the region needs, right? Now, now let's go to the question. I'm sorry for my digression here.
Sure. And I think it's not just connectivity for connectivity's sake. When we were at San Luis, right outside of Alcantara, at the nicest hotel in San Luis, I pulled out my phone. I don't even know if it was 1G.
Yeah.
So to drive business at Alcantara,
You need
and that's just one example. So
Yeah.
it's not just basic connectivity, it's got to be connectivity on steroids
Yeah.
for innovation to really happen.
Yeah.
So,
The question I forgot, I'm sorry.
you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. So as we see countries in the region investing more in areas like space, AI/emerging technology, cybersecurity, where do you see the balance of cooperation and competition across different industries?
Thank you. Look, there will be competition for resources. There will be competition for talent, right? And companies will have to think about also investing in talent. I see connectivity as the basic infrastructure that will enable space and that will enable artificial intelligence. Going back to what was just mentioned, the government of Brazil has pushed for public services being offered online. The moment that you have 7 million people that do not have access to internet, that means that their citizenship is diminished. So there is a real impact that it's not just, it's not rhetorical, right? It's how those people are going to exercise that citizenship. Now the government is pushing for using artificial intelligence throughout the government. And again, this plays a pivotal role on what the role of the government will be. Like you have the public defense system in the country that's going to be using artificial intelligence. If the bearings of that are not clear, if people don't understand what the algorithm is telling the user, this is a good case to pick up, or just not a good case to pick up, it reiterates the exclusion of those people who rely on the public defense system. So you have all those elements that are they feed each other, and they either promote more inclusion with policies towards let's expand access to connectivity, let people understand what is the impact that on their daily lives, or we're going to still be countries of elites, right? Because that's what Latin America in general is. We have a highly educated elite in the country, and then you have a significant amount of society who is excluded, right? Having access to connectivity, having access to education, to health, to government services, it goes beyond what we're watching a movie or playing a game. It's ensuring that every person will have a full exercise of citizenship, right? So every one of those elements, David, that you identified, they will play a role on the quality of the citizenship that Latin America will have in 10, 20, 30 years from now, right? And there is room for collaboration. There is room for cross-pollination in all those fields, and empowering society to play its role, right? To promote each other and each other's well-being. I hope that collaboration will be the winner in that state over there.
Thank you. So Luis, the question that I have for you here is just too basic, I think. In essence, is why do you go to a trade show? What do you try to get out of it? But let's talk about the conversation that we had this morning and what you heard. What did you find helpful? What is still lacking? And just to give the audience a bit of context, we had a very thorough discussion. As Luis mentioned, there are 6, 7 Argentine companies here, large presence at the satellite show, large booth. Do visit them if you are visiting the satellite show. But you guys have been coming to the satellite show for many years, right. And probably hearing the same answers every year. What is missing? What needs to be done to move the ball forward in your mind?
Yeah, thanks, David. Well, that is true. We have been attending the satellite show and other conferences around the world for a long time, more than 10 years now. I think that we didn't miss the SAT show during this time, and it's interesting to share with you what we do here, basically. So at the very beginning, we came here just to see what is happening around the world, right? 10 years ago, 15 years ago, what's going on? I said before that Argentine space program is 30 years long. We've been able to build, launch, and operate Earth observation satellites, including SAOCOM, synthetic aperture radar, geostationary satellites for Argentina. So during the years, we were able to show achievements. So we have something to tell the people. We build satellites, we operate satellites. Those satellites are good for our society. They are working for climate change, sustainability of our countries, a lot of different applications. So that was a few years ago. Okay, nobody knew that Argentina had reached such a high-level capacity on space, right? The other thing we do is to start approaching customers, right? So these are our capabilities. So then they were asking for products, off-the-shelf products, to compare with other competitors on delivery time, cost, performance. So products, now capabilities, products. And that helped a lot to drive our research and development and product development line in INVAP to say, okay, guys, next time we will show you a product. Nowadays, we have a product which is a telecom satellite, small geo, micro geo, whatever, of state-of-the-art technology that we will fly for ARSAT in 2026, a large bird in that case. We approach suppliers. Of course, during 30 years, we have developed a lot of technology. Thanks to our space agency and ARSAT, we developed a lot of technology. We have a very high percentage of in-house technology in our products. We are not just integrators, we are also integrators of technology. And to do that, we have partnered with very key suppliers in US and around the world, but here in US, of course, we do have for a long time a very strong network of suppliers to enable our business. So that's also a very important point. Nowadays, I mentioned before that our domestic market is very small, mainly based on national programs for Earth observation and telecommunications. We have provided 2 satellites for Argentina, very important for the digital divide in our rural areas, hospitals, schools, any place in Argentina. So nowadays we need to move forward. That it's, we need to grow. We need to grow, we need to find out how to grow. If not, we are not sustainable. Our company is not sustainable, the ecosystem is not sustainable, we are not providing what we have developed. So now, after 10, 15 years, we are coming here to better understand how to do that. And that was about the talk we had this morning. When we express, okay, let's do business together. Well, okay, I think that we need to move forward. Well, let's sit down and write things and really materialize this very big opportunity we have in front of us, which is strengthening our relationship. We do have good capabilities in our region, technology capabilities as well, not only procuring services from abroad. We understand that partnership means that we all win, and in that sense, it has to be not just one side, both sides going in different directions, in the two directions. So now we are here for that. We want to understand regulations, legislation, how to really do business together, which are our differentials we have mentioned this morning. Do we have any differential that for US companies is good to partner with us? So let's try to sit down and work on that topic.
Great. I think we're going to start taking a few audience questions. Laura, how are we doing with time? We're good. Okay. So, Andrew, you mentioned the TSA. You gave a little bit more color on the TSA and the opportunity there. I had mentioned that when we were in Sao Luis, the connectivity was a little bit lacking. I know other countries are looking at TSAs, wink, wink, my friend over there. The question is, are there any infrastructure or logistical challenges that need to be addressed for companies operating or who want to operate in the space sector in Latin America? So anybody on the panel could take that.
I can jump in, right? And I think one of the issues that we have to think about is the difference in regulatory frameworks, right? And that really impacts the business. It really impacts how a company can be part and contribute to connectivity or any other activity. So I think if companies are willing to get in, don't be hesitant to go and talk to the regulator if there is one in the case. Go establish that contact, establish the dialogue. What I've seen, and I need to clarify for a second, I'm a consultant for OneWeb, and I assisted them in the process of getting into Brazil. And I'm totally speaking on my personal opinion right now, not from OneWeb. Let's put that clear. What I noticed is the moment that we went there, we were talking 2019, we approached Anatel, we told them, your regulation does not fit in what we're doing. We're a lower orbit satellite company. How can we work together? And the relationship that we built after that was extraordinary, right? There was an opening to hear what we were about, to understand what the technology that we intended to introduce in the country, and on one hand would impact the economy, but on the other hand, how we could use either the existing framework or creating a mechanism that we would comply with the regulation, but it still be a lower orbit system. So I think that this approach of engaging with the regulator, telling them what you want to do, present supporting studies that the impact that they think is not correct, right? There are things like that that they are opening to hear, right? Mexico, this is beautiful. Mexico finished on March 7th a public consultation. The public consultation was, well, there were questions, right? I'm oversimplifying here. But their public consultation was, let me know what is wrong in my framework. Let me know what I should do. Let me know where the industry is going. How can we update this framework? And the timing of this is extraordinary. Mexico will have elections in June, right? So they're laying the groundwork for what will come in the next government. If I were a company at this stage and I had an interest in Mexico, I would be knocking at the door of the regulator. Do not submit anything, just go there, get a meeting, tell them, this is what I need from you. How can we get there, right? I think that more and more we're seeing that the government in the region is not really thinking, I know everything. Let me know what you need. Let me know. I will find out what I'm comfortable to do, right? And that is another example of that, sandboxes, right? Regulatory sandboxes. All the different regulators are applying that for AI, right? Let's see how we can use this to the benefit of everybody. So my take today, if I were to say to a company that's coming to the region, is identify the relevant actors in where you want to get in, and don't hesitate to engage with them. Don't hesitate to show how your presence may benefit the country. That's going to open all the doors that you need. But be genuine, right? Don't create something that is not reasonable, that they're not going to, treat them with respect and get to know what the laws are, right? But engage, and you're going to open opportunities.
Okay, great.
David, just want to take a quick stab at the on the infrastructure side. You know, these places are in remote locations. You've been out to Alcantara, so the real question is, hey, is the infrastructure ready to support larger scale operations there? Are they going to have clean water, electricity, all that kind of stuff that would support larger staffs and operations there? And does that balance against the convenience of launching something at the Space Coast? You get that additional velocity for being closer to the equator, but if the infrastructure is not there to support it, then they may not be able to take advantage of that additional geographic benefits. So,
I think then again, they need to know what you need, right? It goes hand in hand. Like, you identify what they don't have, but let them know what you need and ask them, is this feasible in my time frame of work, right? And they will get back to you. I think large scale, immediately, it's from what we saw, I don't think that's right there. But I think that there was this thirst in, okay, how can we get there, right? And I think sometimes you need to cross the road and say, hey, this is what you need. What you have here is nice, but to get me to launch something from here, I'm going to need, and then you lay out, right, what you might need. Teach them. They're willing to learn, right?
So Mike, during our prep talks, you mentioned the term space equities.
Ah.
So talk about space equities in the context of opportunities in Latin America.
This is quite a controversial question, as you know.
Yes.
You know, in 1967, I believe the United States signed the treaty, Outer Space Treaty, with many, many other nations. And that basically said that all of the signatories to that are pledging equal access to space for all of the members. And we all like to think that space is an infinite resource, but the number of orbital slots, if you're geosynchronous, or the number of optimal LEO orbits, those are finite. Because if you put too many things in those slots, they can interfere with each other. God forbid they collide with each other, which can create something called the Kessler syndrome that some of you have heard about. And so the question that's been raised recently with mega constellations is, do those prevent the equitable access to space for different nations? Because if someone takes the best real estate with the best views in space, it makes it very difficult for others. And you asked a question before, what signals should the United States government be sending to Latin America that would promote space? One of the signals is that we, the United States, and other nations should not permit constellations that are neither safe or have been proven to be safe for space, or that allow equitable access. And I think that the recent mega constellations call that into question as to whether they're consistent with equitable use of space.
I think I can chime in here. I think with the Outer Space Treaty, if I'm not misremembering, talks about the access to benefits of space. And I think that's what we really need to concentrate here is make sure that we're using space sustainably and responsibly so that we can maximize those benefits to people on Earth. And we need to find a way to do that that brings everybody into the fold, and we need to work together across the globe to make sure that we're doing that. And so I just don't want to be confused about what the treaty says or the intentions of LEO operators. I think we're at the table. I think we've shown we're a model for space and the responsible and sustainable use of space, and we're here to have the discussions and open up that door to talk about that. But the end goal should be maximizing the benefits of space so that people on Earth can continue to better their lives.
As I mentioned, there is a significant amount of talent and innovation throughout Latin America. Many of those individuals, well, hopefully many of those individuals will stay in country and build up their workforce, but a lot of those individuals want to work here in the States, but there's an issue of security clearances. So Andrew, you want to handle that one?
Well, I've never been on the actual SSO side, so I can't tell you too much about the process of it, but yes, that is a challenge. And we've seen this with several operators in the field of, hey, we want either a more diverse workforce or we need a certain talent set, and we're just not able to get that because they're not eligible for clearances, or it's extremely difficult for them to get them. But as far as that would require some significant readjustments of our policies with regard to security clearances, and I don't know if, given the geopolitical situation, if we're in that situation right now that we're going to reduce or change requirements given the nature of the competition and the sensitivity of the activities. So. Yeah.
So, my understanding of the Latin American private sector, there are a handful of large companies, and Bob being one of them, but there are a lot of smaller and entrepreneurial companies. What are the opportunities for them? How can they partner with large corporations in country and here in the States? Anybody want to take that?
Well, yeah, I will take that. That's true, David. Yes, you see us as a big company compared to US companies. We are a small company. But there are certainly a cluster of companies, much smaller companies. I would say that during these years, they moved really well because they had to find out how to develop business, probably without too much support from the government. So they had developed such ability, and my feeling, my understanding is that they are prepared to approach other small companies in US. Today we have learned that probably this is one of the best approaches we can have to enter from small companies here in US. So there are companies providing also services in Argentina that could be expanded to US and other places also in our region, because it's not only about talking about US. We see our region as an environment to grow our capability. If I may, we have seen that in our region for many years. Technology has to be procured from abroad, right? So the solutions that our country needs are somehow black box procured from abroad. That creates a lot of problems along the years. And following what you said also, we believe this is not the way we would like to approach business. We want to approach it differently. Differently means we do have needs in our country. Those needs are probably region needs, if not world needs, but let's keep on our region. So if we take one of the strategic goals of our humanity, of our planet, so climate change, environment, sustainability, I believe that is what we should look for. So this is a very important goal. Space, as have said today, it's a place also part of the solution. But going back to the companies, well, I invite you to approach the companies. I don't want to speak for their words, but they are a lot of capabilities, and I think they are smaller, very flexible. They have appetite for also doing things differently. So this is what we see as new space more than other things. So,
David, if I may.
Sure.
I think that also, as you mentioned, small companies, you have clusters that develop throughout the region, right? And they are usually associated with universities. So you have those small companies, and they are at the edge of the research, and they are willing to try almost anything. And they are like startups, right? They're nimble. They might have a project, but if you come with another project and they're able to take it, they might, just because it creates that movement, right? And you may not know everybody that you're going to need, but they will know, right? So I think that the region sometimes is not understood in its totality, right? You have the small companies, you have bigger companies, you have teleports. So you have launch sites, several launch sites in Argentina. So you have all those building blocks of what can be done, right? It is really a matter of getting that information out there and bringing the companies and saying, hey, let's, expose yourself, see what we're able to do, see what they need, and talking in further depth on what can be done, right? So there is a lot to be explored in space. I didn't know that Argentina had like 4 different launch beds, different areas of launches. I had no idea. Right, so it was like, wow. The more you research about the region, the more you get to know of all the capabilities and the potential for development.
So I believe either this week or next week there's a U.S.-Colombia bilat. So I follow these bilats. I was part of the U.S.-Brazil Defense Industry Dialogue, where I ran the space working group. On the U.S. side, quite often we fought hard to get space mentioned, at least on the margins of these bilats. I know both of you guys have worked the process. So how can we get space as more of a relevant topic in bilats moving forward?
Well, I think one of the ways is through this type of dialogue and reaching out to the different agencies. I'm not really sure how we got to the point, but I knew that space was an important strategic issue for us, and so that's why we ensured that we got that into the defense industry dialogues, and it was included in almost everything that we did in the region while I was at the White House. And so, but one of the ways that we're informed is through what the private sector has to say, obviously contributions by think tanks and sending out, hey, here are some issues that we're having. Hey, you should be aware of this. And I don't know when it got to the Space Council, but certainly by following those think tank publications and seeing what was in the industry papers and whatnot, brought those issues up to our attention. So.
Yeah, I certainly agree. Think tank processes are very important, and dialogues like these are very important. And I see government officials here as well. I see Gabriel over there, so certainly I'm sure he's listening keenly. But I'll say with the kind of invigorating of the National Space Council a few years ago, I think there's just a growing understanding that the nexus between civil, commercial, and national security space continues to grow, and I think there was also a growing understanding that space is now fitting into multiple areas of discipline and can certainly help leverage foreign policies and international cooperation and alliances. And so I think it's just becoming more knowledgeable that, hey, space needs to be more routine part of these broader dialogues, and so that we can all continue to talk together and have kind of whole of government approaches, and also have industry kind of feed into those discussions. And I think, during this reign of the Space Council, there's been a tremendous job of bringing industry into dialogue. So, for instance, the U.S.-Japan dialogue, U.S.-France dialogue, we need more in Latin America, and so I'm sure that'll be happening as well. But I think it's ultimately just an acknowledgement that space can leverage, we can leverage space to meet our diplomatic and our economic and security policies and objectives. And yeah, I think more of that, the better. We might hear from Gabriel later in terms of that. But yeah, I think that's it. I just think it's a growing importance, and we need the political attention that it deserves. And that's why I'm grateful for being here today. And dialogues like these are really, really important to get that political attention that it needs.
Thank you. Another question from the audience. I'll just read this verbatim. It seems like telecom companies that connectivity providers partner with are mostly state affiliated. Is this accurate, and how would you, to anyone, characterize the relationship between government and private companies in the emerging space industry in Latin America?
I'll take a shot at
Okay.
it. In certain countries, I think it makes sense to partner with governmental organizations for a number of reasons. But there is nothing that prevents an operator like ourselves from going into Mexico and offering a service under our own brand, which we have done in Mexico and other places in Latin America. So I think there's a hybrid approach where you can work with government organizations, you can wholesale capacity to other operators that may understand the local markets better than you, and you can go in with your own brand. And some of those brands like Amazon have other services that are important to people that they can sell because of that connectivity. So I think a hybrid approach is probably what's going to evolve.
Okay.
I think we continue mentioning government because several governments in the region initiated programs, right? And there are bidding process that companies may take part in offering connectivity, right? There is connecting highways, connecting schools, connecting municipalities that are small and distant from city centers. So that's why a lot of government is mentioned. But not only companies may partner with one another, the company may go as one. It's really depending on the strategy of the business, what they want to do, right? If you want to go by yourself, the only thing that you've got to make sure is that at least in Brazil and some other countries in the region, you've got to have representation in the country, right? You've got to be registered. But beyond that, the format that you're going to be playing in the local market, it's really up to you.
Well, I think we're close to time, so I'm going to let each of the panelists provide a few closing remarks. Starting over here.
Thank you, David. So, well, thanks for this opportunity. I believe it's really important for us to be able to share with you our views. I say that we are on, the time has come to take advantage of this opportunity. So our job is to lead that process in some way, right? We have workforce, we have a lot of capabilities, heritage, experience, but then something needs to lead. And for that, we ask for your help for being our counterparts, for leading this, to make this happen, really, right? It's an opportunity that we have to make it happen. That means establishing a more strong scheme of partnership between us. And this is a lot of work ahead. It's just a little bit we have done till now. So it's a lot of work ahead. And the world is moving towards this, right? And we are in one region, Americas, so why don't we take that advantage? Thanks.
Thank you, Luis.
If I were to say anything, I'd say don't see the engagement with Latin America as a counterbalancing act. Let's figure out a policy for the long term. Let's engage with the region and connect supply chains. Let's make sure that we can all create a prosperous future for all of us, right? There is a lot that the region can offer in knowledge, in geography, in needs, right? We are desperately needing connectivity at this point. So there's a lot to be done, right? I think we in Latin America are doing what we can, and the governments are identifying the priorities and what they need. But counting on the support of other countries will make a huge difference. I think the countries in Latin America are agnostic, right? We're not going to choose one or the other. We're going to play with everybody, right? Let's create the environment for this to move forward, I think.
Thank you, Luciana. Amber.
Yeah, so again, our experience in Latin America has been nothing but welcoming and warming, and there's just tremendous potential there for a lot of great partnerships. And I think whatever we can do to leverage industry and government expertise to have more harmonized approach across both regions, I think that'll help kind of industry seamlessly go from one region to the other, knowing that everything is not going to be exactly the same. There are different needs in different regions, but here is a resource, and appreciate the region kind of welcoming us and industry with open arms, and look forward to continuing to build those partnerships.
Thank you, Amber. Andrew.
No, thank you very much. I want to echo Luciana's comments there. I think the sustained engagement piece is absolutely critical, and that engagement needs to be on its own merits. It can't just simply be, as you mentioned, a geopolitical counterbalancing act. Both the United States and the region have to understand where we can benefit from those partnerships, both G2G and B2B. And then I would say that that only with that sustained engagement, you can't just be tourists in the region. And without that, we won't be able to move forward. And then the other point that I would make is that governments have an important role, but that role is really about setting conditions, setting the frameworks that allow the private sector to flourish in this space, especially now with the prevalence and the growth in the civilian space industry. That's where we really see an important role for government, is just setting those conditions, not only in the business climate, but also in the regulatory climate, to foment that type of agreement that's going to benefit all parties across the hemisphere.
Thank you, Andrew. Mike.
Well, let me begin by thanking CSIS for convening this session on a very, very important topic. And also I want to thank Laura for mentioning that this is a $1 trillion opportunity, because until you said that, the projection I made of more than $500 billion to our chairman and CEO was questionable. But it is a $1 trillion potential industry, and that means there's a huge opportunity as long as we have equitable access to it by all nations. And that means that no one nation or no one company really should dominate this particular segment.
Well, let's round of applause for our panelists. Appreciate it. And we're going to take a short networking break and come back in about 10 minutes. 10 minutes, so talk quickly.
Welcome back. Welcome back to CSIS, everyone, for the second part of our event. I am pleased to welcome to my right, Luciano Gieso, Vice President of Space Systems of Satellogic. To my left, Robert Ayllón, founder of Leviathan Space Industries. And unfortunately, joining us virtually because of last-minute visa issue, but still very happy to have him with us, João Paulo Rodrigues Campos, President and CEO of Visiona Space Technology. We are sorry João cannot join us. Two colleagues from Visiona are actually in the audience, so if you're here and want to talk to them, please let us know, and we're happy to connect you. The first panel raised a number of opportunities, positive trends in terms of economic opportunity in the region, and also, of course, touched on some of the challenges. But that's what we want to focus on this second panel. There is a tendency, I think, to start and end the conversation on what are the obstacles for more economic growth on just the question of capital, the question of funding. But when I talk to experts in the region working on these issues, they raise much more complex challenges. So that's what we want to really delve on. Earlier, I mentioned two organizations working to build capacity in the space business sector. When I spoke to a colleague from CINIEM, for example, the cluster in Mexico, he named a lack of knowledge of export control rules, particularly ITAR, as a challenge. So ITAR, as you may know, is the International Traffic in Arms Regulations. These are the US regulations that control the export of defense articles, but a lot of that applies to space technology as well. Space Latam, the other organization I mentioned, did talk about lack of funding, but more along the lines of that second theme that the first panel was touching on, this idea that there are not necessarily dedicated funding streams or efforts to really help enable development of the sector. With few to no accelerators or incubators in the region, and entrepreneurs that are very savvy technologically, but not necessarily on the business side, it's really challenging for them to build relationships with potential partners. So, like I said, wanted to sort of bring in those examples, touch on some of the specifics that we're going to talk about, because I think we'll find that businesses face structural, regulatory, relational problems in addition to lack of capital and funding, as we talked about, inhibiting how they navigate this ecosystem. So kind of in that context, I may start with you, Luciano. Satellogic has been a multinational company since the beginning, always with an Argentinian brand. But talk to us about what issues come up when you operate and try to advance your business across different jurisdictions in different countries.
Okay, so first of all, thank you very much, Laura, for having me here, and everybody at CSIS for organizing this. So, as you mentioned, yes, we're an Argentine company that was, in our vision, we were born global from the very start. We do have Argentinian founders, and I'm Argentinian, and many of us working in Satellogic are Argentinian, many in Argentina, but also many spread out around different places in the world. But when it comes to the way that we do business, and since we became a public company trading in NASDAQ 2 years ago, we address the globe as a market, okay? We do not, we focus on different regions, and we have adapted to the best of our ability by employing people all around the world. We have a lot of people working abroad for us, and with different offices that we have in different places in the Americas and in Europe. I think we have developed, to a given extent, more of an ability to address markets more, farther away from our own than we have our own Latin America market. To mention it in a different way, the recent announcements that we did on deals and on transactions and projects that we did in different places in the world, and I'm thinking top of my mind, fourth quarter last year were Malaysia, India, Australia, Albania, and we, of course, have a lot of business in Latin America and in Argentina in particular, but we have been able to open new markets, and I don't know that we are in a full, confident way of saying we can adapt to any culture or any market at all, and no, we couldn't. But it hasn't been so much of a struggle these days, especially after we went public. I think that was a very big opener for us to address, markets around the globe.
So talking about differentiators that the INVAP colleague actually brought in the last panel, maybe that's yours. You can work across all these different sectors. Excellent. Robert, I touched on this as well in my introduction, but this idea of building space ecosystems in emerging economies like our country is particularly challenging when even some of the participants in the sector don't know each other. And so can you talk about that? What makes it hard to establish partnerships along those lines? And what do you see as ways to address that?
I think we have to, as you mentioned at the beginning, and hello everybody, glad to be here, invited to this beautiful event, is as the deep questions. Latin America, one of the biggest challenges is competitiveness. How do we become a competitive? What's the road to become a first world nation? And asking those questions will allow us to take the necessary steps. So as we start thinking about building in a space ecosystem or building a technological ecosystem, it is what is the purpose as we serve the local economy? How do we lift the whole economy and its productive sector, and how those values are aligned? For example, in the case of Ecuador, it's an agro-export economy, a lot of oil also, energy. So in this case, it's what can we do for the banana sector, for the shrimp sector, coffee, cocoa, fresh flowers. So that integration and that communication is very important, I'm thinking in terms of that ecosystem. What happens in Latin America, most of the region, is that you see private initiatives, sometimes divorced from the government, that have become successful. And these are going to be sugar plantations, coffee, primary commodities in this case. But then the question is that these guys start investing, technology, adoption, and they become very successful clusters. Now the thing is, how do we align that with space? Because that's where the talent is, that's where the economy is, that's where the client is in Latin America. So I think that's a very important focus that we shouldn't forget.
And I think ties back to this idea of bridging communities, because again, as important as it is to raise awareness about space, it's less about caring about space and then, you're suddenly in space. It's about making those linkages with, like you said, agriculture or mining we talked about earlier, and so keeping the barriers between the communities a little flexible so that the ecosystem is a little broader than just, the companies building satellites, for example.
Exactly, and the important thing about understanding space is that anybody can participate. There's a need for all types of talent. Medical is in this case. We need business leaders, we need programmers, you need people with engineer and a technical background. And that's somewhere where Latin America can really contribute as we start thinking about complex supply chains and what role can Latin America play.
And talking about complex supply chains, I'd like to bring in Joao. Joao Visiona has experience working with international business partners like Thales in major Brazilian projects. What role did the government play in making this partnership possible? We've been talking a lot about, even if the partnership isn't enabled directly with the government, they can play a key role in making business to business possible.
Thank you, Laura. Before anything, Laura, it's a great privilege to be here with you. Thank you for the invitation. Great honor. Visiona, maybe few of you will know Visiona, but we are a JV between Embraer, the plane manufacturer, and Telebras, which is a state company. So what we're trying to do is to build a sort of Embraer of the satellites in Brazil. So regarding the CGVC program, although it was a program for the government, the participation of the government was limited to set the program goals. So we structured everything, made all the procurement and selection process, and made a recommendation for the government about which companies to pursue business. And actually, during this phase, Laura, any let's say, foreign government participation was strongly discouraged because we wanted to make the process as technical as possible. So that's how it proceeds. One should bear in mind that São José dos Campos, which is the city where we're staying, it's a world-class aerospace hub. So Besides Visiona, we have Embraer there. And around Embraer, there are dozens of medium, small, and large companies for space. We have 2 research institutes for aeronautics and for space in the city. So this whole ecosystem is already used to work with international companies and in large projects. And that was the case of SCDC. This is the case also for the new satellites that we designed, the V-Cube that we launched on April last year, and the SAT-VHR, which we are designing right now.
Excellent. And yes, you bring up a good point that I think the first panel touched on it too. The space ecosystem includes research institutions, includes universities, should include those other opportunities for people to contribute their talents. I'm going to ask a couple more general questions to our panel. One is, what is unique about building business relationships across the space sector versus other technology sectors? We've been kind of dancing around this and, talking about technology more broadly, but am I wrong, and is space unique in that sense?
I would say that space is definitely unique, and I think it has a very different mindset compared to other industries. We're all rooting for each other. We definitely think that your success is our success, and then we need to carry each other forward. And in my opinion, at least, I haven't been able to meet a person who hasn't been able to, give you your time, make an introduction, provide advice, or even guide you, And that's really amazing, because in other industries, it can be so competitive, that everybody just wants to keep quiet or be defensive because they don't want to share too much, because they want to be then, in an unfavorable position in a relationship with you. So in that case, the space is different. And I think that's something that, as we think in Latin America, as a very familiar type of environment where relationships are important, where, in this case, you establish those nexus, that really plays really well. So that can allow us to be successful.
Yeah, I totally agree with Robert. And I would take it a step further. It's, beyond relationships, there's agreements. We have a number of projects that we work with very direct competitors with, that will otherwise compete with us in other projects. But it's very natural for this industry to have a lot of collaboration between different players that can be complementary or can be competing in some other cases. I don't want to mention examples, but there is a lot that happens whenever we go into a new market or whenever we want to work with a given government. There is a tendency in the space sector, especially on the governmental side, to favor the local space ecosystem, or to try to, to look for indigenous content on things that they do. And the examples that I gave you at the beginning on the countries that, we signed recent agreements with in recent months, we did all of them not directly, but with a local partner that, that wouldn't necessarily collaborate with us in every other opportunity out there. So, yes, collaboration is key, and I would totally agree that it's extremely unique in this industry, where, I had the sales division of our space systems, offerings to the world, and I'm a sales guy. I've been in sales for many, many years, but I do feel that I have a different approach to things in this industry than I had before in the technology and IT industry that I used to work for. So I totally agree with that point.
You don't have to use all of your talents.
Oh, there you go.
It sells itself. But actually, you brought up something that I want to touch on again, is we also see a lot of countries in Latin America moving towards greater technological autonomy. And I think some countries are defining what that means by them developing everything indigenously. They're in domestic agencies, they're domestic companies, etc. Others are, well, it's both a balance of, indigenous development, but then also purchasing and leveraging the market. And so I'm curious how a company like yours navigates that. You mentioned, some specific countries, but do you think that's going to continue where it's going to be a mix of both?
It is, yeah. And one example that maybe I would give, in our very start, we were helped by INBAP, who's here, all over the room, because our first satellite more than 10 years ago was developed in their offices with their knowledge and know-how. And from there, we sort of kickstarted and launched, that was our satellite number 1. We launched our satellite number 47 2 weeks ago. So there is a lot of that happening, not only in terms of, co-development and indigenous content in terms of materials or labor, but also access to markets. So we partner a lot with companies that would have a more direct, or are defense contractors of the given country, than we do, just to get sort of, the technical side of that type of contact.
So it's going to vary. Joao, you can weigh in on that question if you'd like. Otherwise, I've got another one ready for you.
No, I think that this issue of local content depends a lot of the funding source. So if you're talking about a government-funded project, naturally you're going to have a larger share of the program focus more on the local industry, local content. But as we are a company that is looking at opportunities for the market, on our own solutions, we tend to look anywhere for the best solution available.
And one question you and I, on a topic you and I talked about before today's event, and I raised it in my introduction, export controls. That's kind of like the elephant in the room when it comes to space and international.
For sure.
I'd like you to weigh in on that, how it impacts your company, your sector particularly, and then, and I'll ask you two as well, what's on your wish list if there was one thing that you could fix or simplify to make this sort of partnerships easier?
Yeah, that's true. That's a big issue in my perspective for building partnerships. You have to have a confidence within the partnership, not be turned down later in the project. I had a few experiences that I can share with you. For instance, doing the SDC project, we selected a short list of 3 companies, one American, one French, and then other Japanese. And for the tech transfer package, I noticed how tough it was for the American company to keep up with the other companies from the other countries. So, we also had another example over this year. We received in Brazil the director of a large American research institute at Embraer. And at the end of the event, Embraer managed to have an cooperation agreement signed with this institute. We tried to do the same. In our case, was not allowed because of restrictions for technology transfer. So that's a fact. And and that's the top issue in my wish list, let's say, Laura, that we not only relax a bit the regulations for sport control, but start creating trust-building initiatives, such as training Brazilians in Brazil, in the US, or allowing Brazilian companies to interact with American universities and research institutes, so that we can start strengthening the relationships, and then that will give us more trust to build business together.
Mm-hmm. And that's a tough line to walk, because obviously, as you know, space, dual use, these technologies are sensitive, can be used for all sorts of things. But as you're saying, if there is opening interest to build those partnerships. And the earlier panel talked about Brazil and the USA signing the TSA and how that should lead to more collaboration. So hopefully,
yeah, that's true.
Hopefully, opportunities for smoothing some of those challenges. Luciano, what's on your wish list? As you take some water.
I'll leave the water for later. So I would say, and this was touched upon on the previous panel when they were talking about, U.S. clearances and, and eligibility to qualify for certain projects when it comes to the U.S. government and U.S. governmental agencies. But as we see that happening in Europe too, and there's other places in the world where you need that kind of thing. That is a challenge. We have people, I live in the US, but I'm not cleared for that because I'm not a US citizen, but we have a lot of US citizens in our team here in the US, some that are cleared, some that would be eligible to be cleared. So that is a source of concern. We are in a strategy. We recently got a NOAA license to be, we are now, our satellite constellation is NOAA cleared. We are, we can be audited by them, and we got that license very recently, now in November. And we are in the verge of redomiciling our corporate governance. We have our mother company in the BVI, in the British Virgin Islands. We're moving that to Delaware. We expect to have that ready by the end of mid-2024, so by the end of June. But those are all things that we did because of these kinds of security concerns, right? So I would go, choosing one, I would go with having people cleared to be able to operate on these kinds of projects.
Yes, that's a good one. Robert.
As we think in terms of being allies or being partners, then it's about sharing those responsibilities and that trust. And those mechanisms that exist right now, like the TSA treaty, being part of the international community, and that country being able to be part of the missile technology control regime, So you're definitely expressing your interest in creating the right framework so illicit activities or dangerous activities cannot be, be processed. Then the next question is, then how do we get the people to participate and collaborate? And then the question then goes is, what steps can we take? Can we create a special place to test, to create, to be able to share experiences so we can develop that trust? Because in the long run, it might not be sustainable to be having such a hard restrictive environment, especially as the United States and the industry needs talent. It will only grow based on the amount of talent it can recruit. So those are important questions to start thinking about. Where does it make sense to open up? And where does it make sense, in this case, to be more concerned?
And that is a good segue to our keynote speaker mentioned China. The first panel talked a little bit about that. So space and great power competition are inextricably linked. Like it's almost hard not to talk about it. So I want to ask all of you if you have thoughts on what are the risks, the challenges that geopolitical conflict or the potential of geopolitical conflict present for your operations, and how do you navigate this?
Well, it's a difficult question. There are some things that you have to go with or just go elsewhere while the geopolitical conflict is happening. What I mean is looking at places and markets that are maybe more difficult to enter at some given point. Well, that could happen here and there, and you can always commercially try to tackle others that are not so much in that situation at a given point in time. From the countries that we function in, or the countries that we build our satellites in, or that we have our engineering teams in, we don't see that as so much of a risk right now. Maybe because those countries that we're in are not so much subject to that geopolitical conflict, or so we think. but this is an evolving world, and we are in a situation where these conflicts arise a lot. So we just try to put our chips whenever, or wherever we think is a good market or a good place to operate at any given point in time. And
wait it out.
Yeah.
Joao, do you have anything to add to that?
Now, our vision, Laura, is that Vision is pretty much focused on Brazil. Our vision is to be the company that better understands and has the better solutions to solve Brazilian problems. So we pretty much focus on our own country, so I don't think that affects us too much.
When you have a country that large, yes, you
exactly.
have enough on your hands.
Exactly. That's the point.
Yes. Shifting to a different type of risk, maybe a little related to the earlier question, but security concerns are sometimes cited as a key risk by investors in the region. How do you see that affecting your business? I'll point to you, Robert, and say, if an investor raises that, how do you respond?
As we see from the region, how do you protect investments, and how do you have the right proper agreements and things that fall, for example, under free trade agreements? But there's not a policy right now for Latin America to be embraced or towards that. So the investment aspect, it's something that is not as prioritized in a way when you think about it. So how can we make space investments become more relevant? Because the industry needs to be able to, in Latin America, to absorb that capital, to be able to not only to grow the business, but at the same time to be able to purchase those services that come from the United States. As we're looking at this business-to-business relationship, both parties need to be educated, need to be able to learn how to use the technology and be able to learn how to handle it. So the governments need to be able to have that leadership, especially from the United States, in supporting and saying, we want to engage, we want to be having an open relationship with you. Our investment coming to your region is going to be very relevant. So we definitely need the right mechanisms for that capital to be protected for all these companies that might be interested in participating. But at the same time, you will have the Latin American countries asking, yes, but also open up the markets for us. And we need help, and we need assistance, and we need educational aspect. So that we need to work in partnership with that.
Anything on that? Okay. Kind of shifting gears again, this year continues the trend of major elections across the hemisphere. Mexico was mentioned earlier, of course, the United States. To what degree is political uncertainty a factor in your business relationships? I can imagine one aspect of that might be, does a new government have policies that are going to impact my sector? But then also perhaps the international relations, right? Perhaps whether one country is going to be a stronger partner or not.
Again, I think it's inevitable that sometimes you have, in election years, you have a lot of instability in a given country. We have had projects that were, going steady and suddenly come to a stall because of a change in government. That is working with governments, I would say, in many industries, not only the space one. So, yeah, I would go back to, diversify your reach, right? I do have some countries that I'm thinking of, Mexico being one of them. We signed a letter of intent with them about a year and a half ago, and it's moving too slowly in a year, where there's elections on things that we're trying to pursue together. But I know that's the way things are, and we simply, we're talking to other countries. In fact, in Latin America, there's a few good projects coming up this year, and leaving Mexico alone maybe for a while. I think, it is the reality of any election process anywhere in the world, and it's not, I think, exclusive of our industry.
Joao, how does Visiona navigate that? Even if you are looking at Brazil as your major market, obviously elections there, regional, state.
Sure. Yeah. We just had a major election last year, so. Policies in Brazil, they are suddenly stable. It changes all the time. So, of course, when there is a change in government, there may be more or less appetite to invest in space. But we have a hypothesis that investments in space in Brazil will always be very volatile. So we look for alternatives to diversify the business in order to provide more stable revenues on the downturns. And the key was to go for services. So the services allow us to have a more stable return, revenues disregarding the changes in the government. And in particular on services on the private markets, we have a very strong position.
Excellent. I now have a few questions from the audience. I'm going to pivot to that. Luciano, you mentioned moving to Delaware very soon to support business in the U.S. What are the regulatory benefits of being based in a Latin American state versus, or maybe not benefits, I would say differences, so you can touch on both.
Of Delaware versus other states?
Yeah, and
that's
yes,
the question?
in the region, being in a Latin American state.
Well, first of all, I'm based in Florida, and that is really, and I'm based in Key Biscayne, which is sort of close to Miami, and that's really a Latin American state, I would say, rather than Delaware. But we still haven't made a final decision there. I said it's Delaware, we put it out that way. It could be elsewhere. We're still looking maybe to do it somewhere else.
No, you announced it here. I think that's where it's going to be.
Well, yeah. And it was already announced. I'm not going to get in trouble because of that. But our company, my employer, which is Satellogic USA Inc., is already in Delaware. So it's the natural place to go, given that, a part of the group of Satellogic companies is already registered under Delaware. So it's more that, I think, than anything else.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Another question we have talks about climate vulnerability in the region, which is, of course, is extreme. This reinforces the importance of space for early warning and climate monitoring, but how is climate change posing impediments to deploying the physical infrastructure needed to support the space sector from the ground? And I think that's a really, really great question because, again, we think of space as the stuff up there, but the ground aspect of it is so essential. I don't know, Joao, if you have any comments on that.
No, we haven't seen this yet. Actually, the antennas that we use, they are located in Svalbard, so the climate's already harsh there enough. So we don't see this affecting us now.
Okay.
I would like to provide and elaborate there. In the case of Ecuador, it's interesting because you see the government prioritizing, in this case, infrastructure, filling the streets that are all cracked and full of potholes, and that's great part because of all the rain that is happening now, the climate change, and that's affecting other things like landslides and agricultural problems and affecting the communities. So the government is definitely prioritizing, in a survival mode, trying to respond to the emergencies, but not anticipate about what the major problems are and how we can use this technology to leverage that. And that reaction does not allow, in the long term, to create the right path for success. So definitely we see a big impact when we talk to government officials saying, our priority right now is fixing the potholes, and fixing the bridge, and we have floods. But I say, hold on a second, you have data, you have intelligence, let's focus on this. But they react to that way because there's still an aspect that they're maybe not as educated or familiar with the use of the technology and how to apply it correctly.
Well, and also that ties into, it kind of becomes a circular problem, right? In the sense that if you convince them this year, invest in space, you're not going to see the benefits right away, right? Satellite systems on average take about 7 years, not the small ones that we develop very quickly, but it's a long-term investment. And so the risk is you convince them 1 year, benefits don't really turn up in the 2-3 years, and then did it wane, right? And so it's a balance of, and I think, Joao brought up services, there's a number of things that you can do to kind of show medium-term benefits, but it's a challenge.
Especially when you have elections coming up.
Exactly.
And it's good to take a picture with the bridge, but you cannot take a picture with a satellite image.
Exactly. We often hear that LAC countries are not interested in deciding between competing powers, such as the US and China. But what vulnerabilities does the region face from anti-competitive or uncompetitive practices that extra-hemispheric actors may employ? That's a great question. Any thoughts?
I think it's not homogenic, okay? So it was mentioned on the previous panel that maybe Latin America has less of a struggle, on the competition with China than the US has, and that is a fact. But how each of the countries in Latin America addresses the relationship with China is a constantly evolving matter. It depends on the government and on each of the countries. I could, from our perspective, we're a privately owned company, okay? We even though we're Argentinian from origin, and of course we root for Argentina in every possible way, not only space, but football and everything else.
Yeah.
We
the
have
things that matter.
The things that matter, of course. We have, the Argentinian government has no interest in Satellogic. We have no component of any government, Argentina or anywhere in the world. So speaking from our own perspective, the fact that we are moving our domicile to the US, that we are a US traded company. We are a lot more aligned with China than we would with the US than we would be with China. So I think, I don't know that we are so, agnostic in that sense as a company ourselves.
When you see that you do not share maybe the same economic values and you do not value freedom with a business partner, that relationship can be very difficult to manage. In the case of Ecuador, for example, and the rest of Latin America, you see China has become the main trading partner. And lots of investment has been in the region left by a big void that has been left over the last 20 years. So some recent examples that we had, for example, right after COVID, Ecuador was trying to renegotiate with China some of the loans for the infrastructure projects that they had. But immediately there was pressure on the exports that were going to China, like shrimp and other products, saying, oh, no, there's observations here, that's going to stay in the ports, it's not going to go out, and those products will rot, affecting the exporters. And then we just recently had another situation, pretty much the same with Russia, where in this case, Russia, with fresh flowers and shrimp, was making observations because of a deal with the United States. So you can definitely see how you can be in a situation where you don't want to be in the middle, but you're in the middle and you're involved in those geopolitical environment, and deciding where your market is, what your priorities, and who you want to do business relates in a big way about the potentials for success, because for other reasons, your business can be definitely affected, especially now we think about space. You can follow the same path.
Even if you're not making the political choice to go with one or the other. That's a great point. Joao, I have two questions for you. The first one is related to education. The first panel talked about just some broader socioeconomic trends and some of our countries, because of things like lack of connectivity, students lacking basic access to technology and perhaps then losing out. I'm curious from your sense, Visiona standpoint, do you have the workforce that you need? What are some areas that you wish you could be able to just dip into to expand the company?
Yeah, actually, most of our workforce was trained inside Visiona. So we have a very little pool of engineers trained in space in the market for us to hire. So we'll keep doing this. This became part of our strategy for growth. I think that we would benefit a lot if you could have more relationships with the research institutes and the universities abroad, because that would allow us to access a broader pool of prospect engineers for the company.
And before I leave the education question, either of you want to weigh in?
One of the things, for example, that we're working on, we definitely have to fill a void in the case of Ecuador, because we don't have a space agency, and the government is just trying to understand, how to move to this new space era that is happening. So we're looking from a bottoms-up approach, the private sector trying to talk and guide the conversation regarding space. And we definitely want to facilitate and engage that with American institutions to be able to bring that knowledge to the effort. So glad to share that in this case, that the Space Foundation has a program for K through 12 that's going to be implemented this year in Ecuador, and also the Malo Space Science Institute for university students. So it's going to be a great way of implementing under NASA standards, what abilities the young persons in Ecuador need to develop to be able to participate in space. And the good thing is now that the State Department is going to be sponsoring part of those programs. So that's a high level of engagement, and I think can definitely be replicated across the region.
That's great, and it's not. It could enable B2B, because you're bringing up experts on both sides. Joao, you have a question from the audience. Your company, Visiona, has signed ambitious cooperation agendas with the French Thales and with companies in Italy as well. Have you had no deals with American companies? And if not, why not?
No, actually, L'Oréal was part of the shortlisted companies for the SATC. We also have agreements with American companies. For instance, Maxar is a long-time partner of ours. I think that I would say two main obstacles. One was already discussed here, is the issue of the trust on the ITAR and spot control issues. And the other is actually lack of knowledge of the American industrial base. Because of course we know the big players, but it would be very good for us, especially for the things that we are working on now, which are smaller scale satellites, to have a more clear view about the companies in the US. Some countries, they do have space companies catalogs. So that's something that would help us a lot to improve the cooperations between ourselves and American companies.
So doing something like the Brazilian industry catalog, replicating that
Exactly.
across the region, and in the United, I'd love to see that one for the United States.
The first
That'd
thing
be
for
great.
me to do a cooperation with someone is to know that it exists. So
Exactly, yeah.
And when you are in a project, in the middle of the project, you have a specific need. It's very hard for American company at hazard at random to come to us and be precisely the company that we're looking for. It's much easier if you know what is the industry base. And depending on the issues we have to solve, then we go after the companies in the US.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Robert, there's a question about, obviously it's easier to launch a rocket into orbit, the closer one is to the equator. We know that's one of the advantages for Alcantara has promoted. Other countries have also, in the region, have also emphasized that. How can businesses in the hemisphere cooperate internationally to utilize space facilities in countries like Ecuador? Are there any government restrictions making this more difficult or easy?
So I would say it's a white canvas. So right now there's no restrictions and there's no regulation talking about space. So in a way that's pretty good because you don't have that legacy that weighs on your shoulders as you start thinking about starting a new business or growing. And it allows and provides a room for a thoughtful dialogue, just as the previous panel was mentioning, about the engagement. Mm-hmm. and showing what's needed, what's the potential, how do we play a role, and then what that represents for the region. And then you scale that up is how do we connect the regions and the different ecosystems to provide services, connectivity, thinking in the long term, about point-to-point transportation. That's something that definitely is something very relevant that we as a region have to be ready to be able to adapt.
So not any restrictions to work through, but you need to have those flexibility, have the conversations.
Exactly, created from the ground up.
From the ground up, yes. We touched on this idea of just raising awareness of the value of space, period, right? How much of that, I like to think of Earth observations as the sector where that's the easiest, right? It's just so easy to point to the weather forecast or to the images from Landsat, and obviously higher resolution systems that allow so much insights. But do you think that's still an area that's needed, like raising that awareness even in that sector? Do you find your company still having to start from the beginning?
Yes, yeah, I think you're right on point. I mentioned, and we have been talking a lot about governments here, so the private sector versus, to give you a number, our revenues on the private sector versus the government sector is probably 10%, okay? And that is not exclusive to Satellogic, but to many of us in the Earth observation industry. There is an adoption that is increasing slowly year after year of private companies looking at satellite imagery and related services as a way of making better business decisions. But we still have to do a lot of education, and we still have to convince a number, many companies, especially on the, small and medium business side, of the value that, that imagery from space can bring to their day-to-day operations. So I think it's growing. I think it's, it's showing signs of adoption, but it has a long way to go still.
Yes. And Joao, a similar question to you. I'd be curious if within Brazil, does Visiona need to start that awareness campaign with decision makers in Brazil?
For sure, pretty much so. Both in the government and the private sector, most of the projects, they especially the largest one, they take 2-3 years to develop. That's true for us as well.
So I'll give all of you one last chance to weigh in on this question of obstacles as we wrap up this panel and introduce our last speaker. Joao, I'll go to you first. You mentioned export controls, you mentioned a couple of the obstacles you're facing, but would love to hear any final thoughts.
No, I'm very enthusiastic. I think that having come from Embraer, which is a global company, we have a global outlook. So for us, I think that for Visiona to thrive in the future, we have to look for the best partners anywhere in the world. So there are some roadblocks, just like we discussed, but I think that the key thing is start doing these confidence-building actions, small steps that will help us move together to our larger projects.
Thank you, Joao. Luciano?
Thank you, Laura. So I would say we took it to ourselves to get on a path to overcome those roadblocks, okay? So I think there is an opportunity to work more closely with a number of US agencies that weren't so open before. That is happening a lot. I cannot mention them by name, but there's been a bit of a relaxing of some policies in recent times where those roadblocks and bars are getting lower. I go back to, the clearance thing. I think that is one that is, that we're needing in one specific deal that we're trying to pursue, where it would be great, to have a little bit more openness on eligibility of people who can work on some projects here in the US.
I think leadership is important, and I think the US has the opportunity to show important leadership in the region just to overcome these obstacles. As the diplomats throughout the region, engage the local counterparts from the part of the State Department, I would definitely encourage them, to engage and talk and share about what the US is doing in space and how they can become involved. And I think that's very relevant, because as you have these bilateral relations, you already have a huge list of things that they're talking about. Security, free press, elections. But space sometimes is not part of that agenda. So we need to make sure that we include that, because that would empower these countries and these government officials to think, okay, this is relevant, this is important, let's prioritize. The United States wants to engage, and let's find a way to make it happen. And then show more openness, Let's invite more delegations from these countries to come and visit, Go to Houston, go to Florida, bring not only space companies, which are few and far in between, but also think about the traditional companies, how we integrate them into this ecosystem. And I think that's really important. And then start thinking about, why don't we create projects so a few other countries work together, especially with Artemis. I think it opens up the road for that. So I think the leadership is important. And I think the United States has an opportunity now to fill a very important void there in space in the region before other actors fill that role.
Excellent. Thank you. And please join me in thanking our panel. And finally, to round up this great program today, we welcome Gabriel Sweeney, Director of the Policy, Advocacy, and International Division of the Office of Space Commerce. Gabriel.
Thanks, Laura, and thanks to CSIS and you for organizing this excellent event. Laura and I had the pleasure of working together when we were at NASA together, and I was excited to hear that this event was coming together, because these are issues we spent a lot of time talking about when we were there, and now I spend a lot of time thinking about at the Department of Commerce. I'm the last thing you have on the agenda today, and I know there's a reception hosted by the Embassy of Argentina, as well as some others, since it's Satellite Week, so I will try to be quick, since I'm the only thing that stands between you and probably drinks and snacks. I'll start, I guess, by introducing the Office of Space Commerce a little bit. I suspect those of you in the space community know what we do, but those of you perhaps in the regional community may not as well, and until pretty recently, we've been a pretty, let's say, behind the scenes, until recently, small office. So our mission is expanding, and I think it'd be useful for you to understand the things we work on. We really have three roles, and I should say, before I say the three roles, we are organizationally inside NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. That has some history behind it, but we represent the entire Department of Commerce on space commerce issues. So it's not just focused on NOAA's traditional Earth observation issues. Just wanted to make that clear. Our three roles in the Office of Space Commerce, the one that's largest in terms of funding and in terms of staffing has to do with space situational awareness. So again, those of you in the space community know what that is, but SSA briefly is keeping track of all the objects in space, satellites and junk and debris and kind of everything, and then providing that information to the space community so you can make decisions, whether you need to maneuver to avoid or decide when you're going to launch your rocket or deploy your systems or where you're going to place them. It is a gigantic mission, and it is getting more complicated all the time. Historically, the SSA mission in the United States has been conducted by the US Department of Defense. They have the radars, they have the telescopes, things that were built for sort of Cold War reasons have been repurposed and now used for providing SSA data to the entire global space community. DoD would frankly prefer to operate and focus on their national security mission. So during the last administration, DoD and the Department of Commerce were tasked with transitioning that civil SSA provision to the Department of Commerce. And this administration has kept that direction in place, and we are in the process of rolling out what we call the TRACS system, which is a really gigantic data management tool, let's say, to take all that data from DoD as well as commercial sources, synthesize it together, and provide it to anyone around the world to use for safety of operations. So that's one big chunk of what we're doing. And I will say, although that's not directly about business to business, there are business to business connotations there in terms of bringing commercial data in. That's a big part, but also providing a safety service that then enables global commerce in space. We think it's a critical backbone and why it makes sense to be in the Department of Commerce. We also have a regulatory role. We have for a number of years been, Department of Commerce has been the place that regulates commercial remote sensing. So if it's a US-based company and they want to look down on Earth, they are required to get a license from our office. There is legislation now before Congress proposed by the White House, and there's some pieces of legislation both on the House and Senate side, all of which differ in certain ways, but one thing they share would be expanding our regulatory role. So giving the Office of Space Commerce a role in regulating so-called novel space activities. And I know some of the panelists earlier today talked about having those conversations between regulators and about space policies. And the Office of Space Commerce seems to be sort of the nexus of where that action is going to be for things like satellite servicing, in-space manufacturing, and a lot of the novel activities that don't currently have a regulatory home. So that depends on Congress, but watch that space, and our office expects to play a major role there as well. The final role is the one that I'm really here to talk about, and it's the policy, advocacy, and international role. I'm the director of a small policy, advocacy, and international division, although we also are growing in staff. And we really are the place in the US government whose exclusive or primary job is to listen to the commercial space sector here in the United States and abroad, and then represent those perspectives inside US government and international policy making. So we try to carry the water for the commercial space industry. We try to build the US commercial space industry, and that includes building international connections. The international aspect of our work takes up, I would say, more time than any other. Just to give you a flavor of what we're doing just in the next couple weeks, obviously we have this event here, which is great, focusing on Latin America. We have the French in town for a comprehensive space dialogue. We will have a commercial component to that, what we call a Track 1.5 dialogue, where we bring the private sector in to meet with governments all together, which we find very helpful. We have something like 45 plus companies attending that for a full day of conversations, as well as some prep meetings and some follow-up. After that, I'm going to be leading the largest ever US government delegation focused on space to Africa. We're going to be going to the New Space Africa Conference with 18 plus US government officials to really have a show of interest on that continent and hopefully build on more. Then we're going to be going to Space Symposium in Colorado Springs, where we'll have a dialogue with New Zealand focused on commercial space, and so on and so forth. I think you kind of get the picture that international, I wouldn't say dominates our work, but it is the largest single component. Since January of this year alone, we've had bilaterals with New Zealand, Australia, Canada, India, Finland, Spain, Japan, Angola, the EU, the European Space Agency, and the African Space Agency. So that's in about 2.5 months. My office has run dialogues, or, well, some of them are fancy called dialogues, some of them are more focused meetings. So I've heard a lot of people today talk about the importance of government work, and I think, as you can hear from me, we're doing that work. But that doesn't mean we have it all figured out, and that's really what I kind of want to focus on and then leave you with. An active government can mean a lot of different things, particularly when it comes to incentivizing other behavior, particularly when it comes to incentivizing private sector behavior. So I want to be honest about how I see this and some uncertainty that I, and I think many of my colleagues in government share. You know, we have no shortage of interest in doing this work. One thing I've learned in my few months here in Commerce is that the White House and senior policymakers are very, very interested in pointing us and other parts of the US government at the rest of the world and saying, go increase commercial ties. The mission and the direction is clearly there. That doesn't mean we necessarily know how to do it or know how to do it most effectively. I'll start by that admission by saying there are some things I am confident about, and then I'll conclude with the stuff I'm not at all confident about. I think we've heard today that, you know, it's pretty clear that linkages between Latin America and the United States are critical to our prosperity and national security, right? That's obvious. We all know that. That has been the case for many decades. Commercial ties are already very strong in this region, but there's plenty of room to grow. Space side, but otherwise as well. With regards to space, I think it's fair to say that space is no longer a nice to have thing, right? I love the scientists and I love the exploration, but that is not all space is anymore, even though that's what, you know, people out in the general public might think of first when they think of space. Space is infrastructure. Space is, you know, the backbone of the economic sector. Space is the backbone of transportation. Again, you know, you all know this, but I think it's not fully recognized, certainly in the general public and not necessarily from all government decision makers. So space is not a nice to have. Space is a must have, just like having other sorts of commercial infrastructure are must haves. So although those of us in the space community often treat space like its own special thing, you know, we have space-focused conferences and space-focused dialogues, and that can be useful because there are space-specific issues. But I don't think it's most useful to think of space as its own thing off and apart in its own little world. And to the extent we do treat it like that, I would suggest that we need to stop. Space is not its own thing. Space is part of something much broader. At least that's what it should be. So what I want to leave you with is the stuff I'm not confident about. And I want to end with this because at least I, and I think it's okay to say others in the government, really could use your help. I was pleased earlier today to hear the advice of don't be too polite to those of us in government, and I definitely want to echo that. We do not know how we can best help you, and I'm speaking specifically to those of you in the commercial sector. How can we most effectively build these commercial ties, particularly across borders, for our space sectors and our broader economies? There's no shortage of ideas, and there's no shortage of work. Just to mention some things we're working on right now, in addition to those specific conversations with specific countries and regions, we're trying to reform export controls, right? ITAR and the Commerce Controlled List, those are a major factor in space commerce, trying to do our best to unstick some things there. We are in the process of updating regulatory systems and explaining those regulatory systems to international partners. We are in the process of aligning space priorities between governments so that one, you know, if you're going to act in a certain way in one country, you can act in a similar way in another country pretty easily. We're trying to facilitate matchmaking, particularly through the International Trade Administration, that can set companies up in sort of a matchmaking process to make very specific connections or close specific deals. Parts of the US government can backstop investments, can provide information to promote safety of operations, like we're doing through our space situational awareness operations. And of course, the operators in space, like NASA and the Department of Defense and NOAA itself, can provide government funding for their own systems, which of course kickstarts industry and then can provide additional capabilities that the broader commercial ecosystem can use. So we are doing all of those things, and we're trying to do more. But I am certain that those of you involved in this sector on a day-to-day basis can be even more specific. I'm certain that you could tell me and tell my colleagues much more granular details about pain points and opportunities that you haven't been able to meet and things that you wish the United States government would do. So I'll leave you with my uncertainty and that request. If you have those ideas or have those suggestions or complaints, just tell us. We are open to meeting or talking with almost anyone. I know other parts of the US government are as well, and if you don't find them as open as you think they should be, come and tell us and we will get you in the door. So, I'll be at the reception in a few minutes. You can tell me there, or you can reach out to us through our website, set up a meeting, go to any of the conferences. But if there are things we can do, please do not hesitate to tell us. I can't promise we will always be successful, but I can promise that we will listen and that we will try. So thanks. I appreciate this whole event. Congratulations on a really successful day. Thanks.
And that concludes our program. Thank you so much for being here, for your great questions. Thank you again to all the speakers.